Well, hello, and welcome to Apologetics 101. I'm your host, Brian, and we are here today watching a pre recorded uh, interview that I had with Dr. Peter Line. Also had one with Dr. Jerry Bergman. I will be showing that later as well in this video. But the topic matter is over Lucy, Neanderthals, and Australopithecines, and that sort of thing. That is what the topic matter is over today. And so we're going to be discussing that and and bringing you that information. But essentially, it's a response to some things that Erika had said during um, her response to my Tompkins interview originally, and I wanted to respond to that. And as you know, I've been splitting this up into a series. And I told you I had three goals, right? One, I wanted to respond to Erika concerning my Tompkins interview, which is what this video is going to be about today, partly. And second, is to respond to Erika as a whole over this controversy subject matter. And the third is to respond to the controversy overall. And so those are the three goals that I have in this series. So if you're wondering why I'm making this part of the series, it's simply because this was brought up by Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins in my interview with him, and obviously Erika did respond to it because she's a primatologist and an evolutionist on top of that, so she decided to respond to it. And so I got Dr. Peter Line, who I had on this channel before, who is very knowledgeable in this area. And so I got him on here to discuss Australopithecines and Lucy, and also Jerry Bergman. I had to respond to different things. I wasn't sure exactly how much of the material I used, but I did decide to use what he had said on Neanderthals, and so I brought that together with my Peter Line interview. And so today, that is what I'm going to be discussing. I was going to be doing a full video review of the last video that was produced by Glenn Williamson, but I've changed my mind on that. I'm still going to be doing responses to what he said, but I'm going to be doing it in the form of clips. It was supposed to be a full video review. I did have his permission to do this, but I changed my mind on it because I was going to end up repeating a lot of the things that I said in the video. I was going to actually end up repeating a lot of the things, and I didn't want to have to keep on repeating it. So I just kind of split it up into various videos I'm doing, upcoming videos I'm doing. I am going to be doing a gap versus ungap video very soon that is going to be responding to a lot of the arguments that Glenn made in that video, as well as his previous video, the one he titled Tompkins is Allergic to Controls video that he had released probably around the same time that I released my controlling the narrative video, roughly around that time. They were basically, they had no connection to each other, no reason for each other being dropped, but they were basically dropped almost at the same time. Glenn Williamson sent the forward to me to end that he had sent to Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins concerning it, because he even though the video is called Tompkins allergic to controls, it's really not really about controls as much. They claim it is, but it's really not. It's more about gap versus ungap. And I've been watching through it and stuff like that because I'm going to be doing a response to stuff he says in that video as well as stuff he says in the other video. So it's going to be a long one, but it's going to be done in the form of clips. So but this I decided to go ahead and do this video because I already got some pre-recorded interviews and I wanted to get some of those off my computer already. So I decided to go ahead and do this one, and that way I can go ahead and get that up and get some of my memory in my computer cleared off. And without further ado, let's dive in. Okay, we're here today with Dr. Peter Line, and do you want to tell a few things about yourself and your background real quick, just to kind of give people an idea, just very briefly?
Yeah. Well, I have a background in my bachelor degree was in biophysics and instrumental science, so sort of biomedical science background, and I did a master's degree in neuroscience in the area of sort of recording brain electrical signals of people doing certain tasks, mental rotation objects, and then I did a doctorate degree in the mental health area in schizophrenia, trying to image auditory hallucinations in the brain where they come from, people who hear voices and things like that. So that's another great area. I won't get into that, but yeah. So did a doctorate in that, and then after that, worked in mainly in neuroscience research for a few years, and then worked at the university as a lecturer for about over a decade or so, sort of in the biomedical science area, but teaching sort of anatomy and physiology area, mainly in the a lot in the neuroanatomy, neurophysiology, muscle physiology, biophysics, things like that. Yeah, so that's kind of my background. Yeah, so I'm sort of retired or semi-retired, I guess you could call it now.
Awesome. And
Yeah.
today we are responding to Erika from Gutsy Gibbon concerning the section where she responds to me and Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins interview, because Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins does a presentation, and in the presentation, he does uh, a response or a reference to Lucy and other Australopithecines in general, and so she responded to my whole interview with Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins, but obviously we're just going to be dealing with the area in which she responds to the Australopithecines.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so you ready?
Yes.
All right.
So this is typically a typical figure that you might see. And basically you see apes there at the start, you see humans there at the end, but essentially everything in between is hypothetical and theoretical. That's all we really see in the fossil record anyway.
Wrong. Wrong, Jeff. You are wrong there. We have Sahelanthropus chilensis, Aurantuganensis, Ardipithecus cadavra, Ardipithecus ramidus, Australopithecus anamensis, Australopithecus afarensis, Australopithecus barroghazali, Australopithecus diurnida, Australopithecus garhi, Australopithecus africanus, Australopithecus sediba, Homo habilis, Kenyanthropus platyops, Homo rudolfensis, Homo erectus, potentially Homo georgicus, Homo erectus, potentially Homo ergaster, Homo erectus sensu-lato. You have Homo naledi, Homo floresiensis, Homo heidelbergensis, Homo rhodesiensis, Homo bodoensis, Neanderthalensis, Homo neanderthalensis, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens. There are.
All right. Okay. Essentially, she is elephant hurdling. What's known as elephant hurling. This is a
Yeah.
debate tactic where you kind of throw as much as you can at someone
Yeah,
without
I'm
dealing with
familiar
the
with it.
quality
Yeah.
of the evidence,
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so instead of actually, because with Australopithecines, you pretty much have to deal with it case by case because
Yeah.
the evidence is not the same in every case.
Yeah.
Some of it's much more scant and much more disputed, while others are much more clear. But we'll deal with these being considered transitionals here in a second. But
Yeah.
so what do you think of her list here?
Yeah, I actually had a slide where I kind of see how I'll admit she's probably better at pronouncing those names than I will ever be. There's a lot of them, so I don't even sometimes dare say some of those names because I might pronounce it wrong. So she does well there. But the thing is that the list, all those names, that's fine. In fact, there's been throughout history a smorgasbord of species names for so-called ape men, and a lot of them kind of overlap. So basically, I don't know if she mentioned Homo bodoensis there, but that was not a new not invented because of his new specimens, but because of the muddle in the middle, because it's such a confusing mess. The alleged Middle Pleistocene, a period from about, I don't know, 200 to 700,000 so years ago, allegedly, where you have all these sort of robust human skulls, which they often broadly throw into a category called Homo heidelbergensis if it's broadly defined, but it may go under sort of categories if they may be Homo rhodosensis, and then they may sort of split them up into other things, and so yeah, and so the same with Homo erectus. You can Homo georgicus is just another name for the Damanesia Homo erectus specimen. So, and Homo soprano is one that was that what you said? I can't remember, but there was one. Some of them they don't know whether to put in Homo erectus or heidelbergensis. Personally, I think they're the same. It's just that kind of what happens is that if the cranium is small, the cranial capacity is small, they tend to put them in Homo erectus, and if they're larger, they sort of tend to not to, and put them somewhere else, and then they say, well, that's proof that all Homo erectus specimens have got small brains. But that's circular reasoning, you know. And to give you an example, you know, there's a lot of interesting stuff in China, but there was one cranium from Suchang, if that's pronounced correct. It had a cranial capacity of 1,800 centimeters cubed, which is much larger than the average human, about 1,344 centimeters cubed. And it was initially sort of had the lookings of erectus, you know. It had brow ridges, low flat cranium, low cranium, sorry, and the greatest width was near the bottom. It had a sort of super occipital torus at the back, not a really pronounced one. But it was ruled out. I think I read because it wasn't sort of that robust or whatever, and basically the brain size. But I checked the cranial wall thickness, say the parietal eminence, and that was within the Homo erectus range. So essentially, you're basically ruling out things because they got a really large brain, which probably affects the form of the skull to some effect. It has some bossing or something, so that the Homo erectus sort of has a gamba roof shape to it. But if the brain really expands, because that actually forms the shape of the cranium a lot, and so that's the case there. So you have all these sort of the ways that it define things. But if you look at the Australopithecines, a lot of names there. What happens is, for instance, some put Australopithecus anamensis into afarensis. They'll put Australopithecus bargalsi, or how you pronounce it, into afarensis. Same with Deramia or whatever it was, into afarensis. And Canaanthropus platyops, they'll put it, instead of its own genus, they'll put that in Australopithecus. And some say that platyops is actually a version of afarensis. And so you have all these things, and some will put the Homo habilis, some divide them up into two species, Homo habilis, Homo rudolfensis. Others don't, but I put them in the Australopithecines, either as a separate category, or some of them may affiliate with Africanus, you know, like, you know, the KNMER 1813 cranium, or some of those cranium may actually be just variation of Africanus. So you have all these things, and some say Australopithecus prometheus is just a variation of Africanus. And so, yeah, so there's probably a lot of inflation there. And I suspect when you get down to it, the Australopithecines probably, if not one biblical kind, there weren't very many, because you just see, if you had originally a lot of the diverse genetic information, and at the start it's kind of split up, and so that's what you see, all the variation. And there may be more than one biblical kind, I'm not sure. You have the robust Australopithecines, which seems to be different to some degree. Although if you look at the female skulls, some of them aren't that different from some of the more gracile ones, but it's I guess the ones with a real big sagittal crest and a big dish face, that's the. But yeah, so I don't think that all these species means nothing. They're not transitional. It's just if you have you could do the same of human people today based on the population groups. You pick a character and divide them into separate categories based on some peculiarity to that population, but it wouldn't mean they were different species. All be humans, and that's what a lot they're doing. It just reminds me of sort of the phrenology in the 19th century where they looked at humps and bumps on the skulls, and if you had a certain bump, you were a criminal, or tended you had a weakness to steal or something like that. So you have to be a little bit cautious about sort of over interpreting all these things. Make it different class of humans, and the thing is, in Australia, it's actually an interesting place because they have actually found some very robust skulls. In fact, like the Land Lake hominid skull 50, probably one of the most robust skulls in the fossil record, and it has a cranial capacity over 1,500 cubic centimeters, so way above the average human. But it has a big brow ridge, really thick cranial vault. Some say it may be pathological, but it's very doubtful. But there's others as well, and even if it was, it wouldn't take away some of the other features. But everyone acknowledged that as a modern human, fully modern, and so there's a lot of variability in human populations today, and
variability, and there's also variability within like different primates and things like that as well.
Yeah.
So we would expect like same thing when we see today, like when we look at chimps and when we look at different kinds of chimps, you look at different kinds of apes, and I mean there's all kinds of variations as a result. But of course, like you said, this would not be transitional. A transitional form, by definition, is an in-between state. And so we would, in fact, really and truthfully, it's not just one that we would have to have. It would be a chain of them, because that's the only way to link them. Otherwise, if you only have one or two, how do you know it's not just similarities within a particular group or something?
Yeah.
And you wouldn't be able to link them. So you'd have to have them in a kind of a succession, one after the next, that links them to whatever you think it evolved into. And so if you're going to claim that. And so Charles Darwin himself recognized the lack of transitions in the fossil record in this day. He thought that maybe later fossils would help prove that. Now, Tompkins is obviously talking about the fact that there is nothing in the middle. In other words, there's no transitional. Bringing up Australopithecines for her doesn't really falsify what Tompkins said. Because I mean, where's the transitionals between the Australopithecines? Where's the transitionals between the apes and the Australopithecines? Where's the transitionals between the Australopithecines and the humans? This is all lacking. So what Tompkins said is completely correct.
No, I regard Australopithecines as just another primate group. I don't look at them as apes as with apes today, because there are apes in the fossil record which are more like apes today, but Australopithecines seems to be a little bit different. So they're in a category of their own. That's how I regard it.
But you wouldn't classify them, like, for example, today we have what's called the great apes, and great apes include things like chimps and orangutans and things like that in the great apes. But you wouldn't, since you wouldn't classify them as apes, you wouldn't see them as great apes either. So you're not only
no. That's what I mean. We don't have that. There's not that many existing apes. There's only the three great apes, and you have the lesser ape, the gibbon. But I wouldn't. They don't really. They're apish, but they have some different features, and like with Oxnard's analysis, they differ from both humans and apes in some ways more than human and apes do from each other. So they're out there on a different trajectory, a different place. They have a lot of variability, so I don't know if it's one or more biblical kind. But in the same way, we don't classify monkeys as apes, So there's different groups and categories of primates. So the Australopithecines are extinct. Okay, and maybe they were sort of seem to be located in Africa only, and they seem to have died out. Maybe it's because the environment that the evolutionists reckoned they lived in, which is full of dangerous predators, that they just couldn't survive, and basically, and it's sort of they would have had to rely on safety to live in the trees. There's no way you can survive in a savanna as a primate on the ground. You won't survive. Baboons live in at night, go in trees or cliffs to keep safe. Imagine if it was 10 times worse than today. If you only relied on bipedalism and left the trees, you'd be sort of you'd just be a buffet for the predators there. That's all you'd be. So but I don't know why they went extinct, but it just seems like that they probably couldn't. It was a pretty tough environment, and they couldn't survive.
Right.
And
that's fine. Well, make sure that I'm clear though. You're not necessarily denying that there could be a mixture of fossils, bones and stuff. The stuff's being found over a large area, so there's always a possibility of something being chimeric or whatnot. What you're saying though is the part that we can clearly identify as what you would call an apish primate, essentially, is definitely the Australopithecine. You're not denying that fossils do get mixed up and stuff. Like, for example, that they found a fossil of what was it, a gibbon? I think maybe, I can't remember. It was some kind of fossil of a primate in Lucy. It's like right here at the top of the base vertebrae.
But because I found one top vertebrae doesn't mean
right
everything else. I think I know what you're getting at, but I don't subscribe to that because Lucy's pelvis is very tiny. So if there's any part of that's human, it'd have to be a hobbit living there because it's so small. So, and the thing is, I listen, and even the sacrum,
we have a hobbit though.
Yeah, that's in Indonesia, and I can't explain how that got there. But the thing is, it just doesn't make sense to me. But it doesn't matter because they can't all be commingled, And if something is commingled, sure, that there's the odd bone or something like that, but it'd be pretty obvious because the femur wouldn't match the hip bone if there's a human there, because it'd be much larger. Lucy's femur is very short, and so if it was a human, the femur would be longer. It'd be longer, and it kind of wouldn't match. And so it's the thing is it's just sort of, to me, it's totally unnecessary. And the thing is,
you can only get so far with the argument.
If that pelvis was basically a human, then it, like I think I discussed somewhere else the other day, it has features that indicated it wasn't kind of very good at standing upright. It wasn't keeping its balance because the sacrum wasn't the top of the sacrum. The body, basically this part here, is very small, and so when you stand up, the load of your body comes from the lumbar region onto that, and then it goes to the sacroiliac joint, which again they examine features on the sacrum, which indicates that the ligaments that bind bind the posterior, but this bind the sacrum to the ischium. When you stand up, they actually help stabilize the sacroiliac joint, which is where the weight transfers from the sacrum to the pelvic girdle, the hip bones, as you stand erect, and then it goes to the femur here. And so basically, again, lack of stability. And then you have this, if you compare it here, these are the two here. The blades, the iliac blades here don't curve around the vertebral column that much. They're more sort of flaring outwards, but they don't really curve around, whereas the human ones curve around. So it gives the gluteal muscles that attach here more, they come around the side, and so they can kind of help you balance the body, the trunk laterally more. And so and there's other features too. And the experts who examine, which are evolutionists themselves. So the thing is, you have certain different evolutionists have come to different conclusions, and a lot of it determined is based on whether they view Lucy as the, she had to walk like humans do. Then I'll get a very different interpretation. But there are a lot of more objective analysis by evolutionists, and they indicate that. And so if that was a human pelvis, then it wouldn't be it'd be a very it'd probably be pathological or something like that, but it'd be a very small.
I have a question on that. The sanctum. Does the sanctum look human to you, or because some people have argued that it looks human? Evolutionists have argued it looks human. YCs have argued that it looks human because it's a human sanctum, even though it's like really, really small. And evolutionists have pointed out that it's really small, too small to be.
I've seen it said that because it has a number of holes that, and a chimpanzee one has more holes there. I think 10 or 5 pairs, but that's because that would be the fusion of more vertebra. This has fused 5 vertebra, but I think the gibbon has also 5 vertebra fused, which would give it 4 pairs of holes as well. So the number of fused vertebrae in the sacrum varies, and they're not all the same in all the apes either. And so I wouldn't use as an argument. The thing is, like I say, that's what I'm saying. If you think as Lucy as an ape, then you'll ape like today's ape, then you'd be misled because it isn't an ape. And you can just look at the compare the skull of Lucy. And this is Lucy and a chimpanzee skull, okay? So they're not the same. It's very apish, but it's different. And so I think that comparing, thinking of it as an ape like a chimp is just it really doesn't sort of add up. And it makes more sense, like Oxnard did, an evolutionist, a hostile witness who looked at these things and said, the Australopithecines are different from both apes and humans in a lot of the features they examined, and that's why the pelvis too. The thing with it is because the chimp pelvis is very tall. Okay, so the iliac blades are very tall, and they really flare laterally, and the blades go in this sort of coronal direction, perpendicular to the sagittal plane, and they don't curve around. They're very flat. Lucy's not as coronally oriented, but they're not that curve around either. So yeah, it just
you say it's different from human though, the sanctum.
Well, what I say, the thing is, if it was a human, then it wasn't designed to walk much upright because the back would have problems because there'd be too much pressure on this point here, the sacrum. This is where the weight goes because it's very, very small. Okay, so that's sort of one of the differences. Okay, I'm not an expert on the sacrum, but also, like I said, the ligaments that bind these two things together here, ischium and sacrum, evolutionist expert examined them and said they're weakly developed, which means when you stand upright, this joint will be unstable. And so if you're walking fast or running, you know, or standing up, it's gonna be a problem. And then, like I said, the way these blades flare around, they don't curve around. It's different. Again, the muscles don't have that kind of the capability to balance the body. So it's not human. I think, you know, it's sort of God created diversity, and so I think you need to look at it like that. You know,
I have a question on Homo habilis. A lot of people say that Homo habilis is kind of like a garbage dump, like where you don't know where a bone or fossil belongs, so you just kind of put it in the label of Homo habilis. Yeah. Do you see Homo habilis being an artificial category, a chimeric, or how do you view Homo habilis?
Yeah, I find it when it was originally formed, it was by Louis Leakey and a couple of his associates back in the early 60s. And basically, there was a lot of controversy because some thought it was just a variant of Africanus, again, Australopithecus africanus. And but anyhow, the name survived, but a lot of things have been put in there, which kind of I didn't really want to put in it. Couldn't find anywhere else. A lot of it has to do with a little bit larger cranial capacity and things like that. So it was kind of like a good stopgap missing link category, you know, you could promote and things like that. But one of the issues has been that so this has been probably the main icon, except for the type specimen OH7, but this one is, I guess, more to it. This is the KNMER 1470 skull or 1470 man. It is used to promote evolution a lot. And so when it was originally reconstructed, the face was, I'm not sure this one is correct either, but the face was very vertical, very flat. And so that made it look human. And they made it reconstruct so the brain was, cranial capacity was really large, sort of up near 800, although it went to 752. But one of the experts who reconstructed it, he actually disagreed. He thought they were basically using their, if I had the slides, but I don't, but so I can't give you an accurate quote. But the late Alan Walker, that they were letting their preconceived ideas dictate morphology rather than the other way around. And so they basically reconstructed it so that it would be more human when it wasn't. He thought it was a big brain Australopithecine, and that this face should be jutting out more. And basically, but later on, a team by Bromwich basically did kind of do another reconstruction where the face was more going out that way, and the brain shrank a bit, and things like that. And so basically, a lot of people, and this has been also put as a type specimen of Homo rudolfensis. It's actually Homo habilis, but people will define Homo habilis more narrowly, sensu stricto. Then they put this specimen into a category called Homo rudolfensis. Okay, but both this and Homo habilis should not be in the genus Homo. They belong either with the Australopithecine, whether it's another species or with an existing species and things like that. So I've actually gone through and looked at most of the controversial skulls or crania in Homo habilis, and you can actually sort it out. It's not and there's one skull SK 847, I think it is, which only had mainly a bit of its face there. I think that's Homo erectus. And I know Ronald Clark, who actually found Littlefoot, he believes that, and it's almost identical to a Homo erectus skull. And so that is probably one partial cranium in that's being classified by some as Homo habilis that should be in Homo erectus, is likely human, but most others belong with the Australopithecines. And there's no the postcranially well, for Homo rudolfensis, there are no cranially associated postcranial elements, so forget about that. The Homo habilis, the only ones of any note is that are associated with so-called diagnostic remains is OH62, and basically those the limb proportions are more as ape-like or more than Lucy is. So that's not a good thing for an ancestor. If the transitional form is more ape-like than its ancestor. So, and that's where you have and this is where you get into where you had that sequence of transitional form from ape to human. The big gap is between whether you call it Australopithecus or Homo habilis, doesn't matter much. Postcranially, there's a big gap between that and Homo erectus. When the Homo erectus comes up in evolutionary time, maybe a few 100,000 years later, or whatever that skeleton is found, is essentially from the neck down a modern human skeleton, and to go from that to a sort of apish Lucy skeleton or Homo habilis skeleton, which was as apish as Lucy anyhow, in a few 100,000 years, that's impossible. You can do the mass, even just to make it changes. Say it walk bipedally, but to make it walk around like a human, it's been calculated. It doesn't matter. The waiting time to fix those mutations, it'll never happen, and that's just for that. In fact, to take a chimp, the human has hundreds of features that have to be fixed in a genome. I mean, you got to get both point mutations on both chromosomes throughout all the population to become a permanent part of that species, and that takes time, and the mutation may have to happen a lot of times. And the problem is most mutations probably by itself aren't any good anyhow. They're more detrimental.
With Homo habilis, do you think that any bones were mixed in with it?
Well, I think as a species, yes, in terms of that they have certain femurs and even a pelvis that they tout as human-like, but the thing is that there's not associated with any diagnostic cranial elements, so they could well be human Homo erectus or human whatever. So basically, in that sense, yeah, there could be. There's probably mixed up as a species, but are they? Well, there aren't really any skeletons except for OH62 and stuff. So and you have the OH7, which had some hand bones, which don't really tell you much. Didn't tell much, and there's a foot called OH8, which well, it's sort of probably Australopithecine foot, but I don't know I don't think there's a direct association between that and OH7. It could, whether it's foot or not, but yeah, I don't think it used to be because the way they reconstructed this, to make it brain so large and the vertical face, that think this could be a human, and even in my early days, I thought maybe it could be, but then when it came out that they reconstructed, made it deliberately look that way, and the brain size inflated, then I certainly changed my mind. Then you read what Alan Walker, who helped reconstruct it, was saying about it. He's deceased now, and then you realise, it certainly what likely wasn't a human. And so Bromwich, they thought it had a cranial capacity of 625 cubic centimeters. Although in the end, by the formula they worked it out by, although they ended up said I must probably around 700. But I think that was just to placate some. I think that was just to sort of not to be step too far out of line or whatever. I don't know why they said 700 when they came up with 625. But regardless, anyhow, a gorilla skull has been clocked in at 752 cubic centimeters. So, and there's humans have there's some humans too who have very low small cranial capacity and still have normal intelligence. And so I don't think you don't necessarily look at brain size to tell intelligence. In fact, it's not. And that's one of the issues is the evolutionists, their theory, which just kind of gets back to why a lot of them are upset about the Homo naledi finds, that occurred recently. I found that they may have buried, believe they're human, because certain parts of their body, they have essentially modern human feet, long legs, and a human-esque head, erectus-like head, and things like that. They had some odd finds, which I believe can be explained by pathology in some of the individuals, but that because I had a small brain size, they should, in evolution, most evolution believe they should not have been able to make engravings on the wall, or they certainly shouldn't be able to bury the dead or have, go carry out that sort of routines, burying the dead, making engravings on the wall, and making fire and things like that. And so, because they believe that it was the brain size, it was sort of selected for, intelligence was selected for, and it was as the brains got larger that they were able to do that. But what we're seeing is people with very cranial capacity in the Homo naledi range. There's certainly one person that I know that lived a while ago called Daniel Line. He had a brain size in that sort of range, a very low cranial capacity, and was normal intelligence. So you didn't need the big brain to do all these things. And so that's a problem, because if they're saying a brain size developed over eons and accumulated because of, and as people got more intelligent, the brain grew. But if you didn't need brain size to basically do all intelligent things, then how could it wouldn't be selected for? Because the brain uses a lot of the metabolic resources of the body, a lot more than its fair share. In fact, more than most parts of the body. Only parts I would say, I don't know how it compares with muscles when you're actually doing a big workout. Muscles use a lot of energy too. Use up a lot of ATP, adenosine triphosphate, but the energy currents in the cell. But so basically, there's no going forward from if you have a sort of an apish brain. Like in a home, there's no going forward upward to becoming human, because there wouldn't be any advantage in the increments of brain size increase that evolutionists are happening. In fact, in humans, you have a guy Anatole of France. He had a Homo erectus sized brain, 1,100 cubic centimeters, and he won a Nobel Prize for literature. That was about 100 years ago, whatever. And yet someone else, Leo Tolstoy, had a brain size of 2,000 cubic centimeters, and he was also a great writer or whatever at the time. But who was more intelligent? You don't know. But there was 900 cubic centimeters between them, and that's almost the difference between the average. That'd be the difference between the average human brain and chimp. And so if you figure that out, it's variation, and then you can go down to someone with like Daniel Line, who had a brain size and the high 600 cubic centimeters, depending on how you estimated. And actually his cerebral hemispheres were small for even his brain, because the cerebellum was nearly the same size. So proportionally, his cerebral hemispheres were much less. And so basically, so there's a big conundrum there, and they don't know what actually created this huge brain, but it's an interesting thing. Why do we have huge brains? Because it wouldn't been selected for. I don't know why someone has 1,100 cubic centimeters, some have 2,000 cubic centimeters. Size has something to do with it. Body size does matter to some degree, but only to a certain extent. Does it explain the difference in brain size between people?
In the chat, when you were being interviewed by Donnie, Gutsy Gibbon was in there, and in there she actually misunderstood your argument. She thought that somehow that, at least with application, she thought that you were trying to say that that to rule out whether it's an Australopithecine on the basis of its brain size. But you're
no. I wasn't. No,
Yeah, that's why.
This is why, because I didn't go through the slides I had. That wasn't the point I was making. What I was saying is that some humans, and we've only measured a tiny minuscule fraction of the humans that have ever lived or live. So there's probably people of normal intelligence smaller than Daniel Lyon. So what you have is people. There will be people with normal intelligence of Homo naledi-sized brain. So technically, you could these small Homo erectus people could have been normal intelligence. Although I believe there probably was some pathology there involved, but it's not sort of. I believe God has given man something special, a spirit, a sort of from him, a soul that is different from animals. But our brains is also neuro organization of the brain. But the thing is, the Australopithecines. What I'm saying is that Australopithecines don't have that organization, but they don't have the spirit of God in them either. They don't have the organization of human brain. But what I'm saying is they could never get to a human brain, even if evolution was possible, because theoretically, at some of the Australopithecine level, there are some humans who are kind of in that area. If you include the Homo habilis specimens as Australopithecines, who have the same brain size, but they would have ape intelligence. But the thing is, humans have that same brain size and have human intelligence, and so it's not getting more brain size isn't going to make any difference, because in humans you can have 1,000 cubic centimeters difference in brain size. It makes no difference to your intelligence. So why would that? And so the average selective value, if you go by the evolution scenario, would be 20 cubic centimeters per 100,000 years. This was added in brain size over sort of several million years. That works out to a few pinheads of brain tissue per generation of so-called hominid. So an Australopithecine adding a few millimeter cubed or a few pinheads of brain tissue, what would that wouldn't help it at all.
Homo naledi was also mentioned in there, I noticed, but
Yeah.
Homo naledi would be among the humans that the Tompkins had pointed out as well. So so obviously naledi wouldn't be an in between there. Naledi is considered human. I wonder. I think she may be assuming that naledi is somehow transitional between human and Australopithecines due to its brain size, because she claims, because she has claimed before at least, that the naledi has a brain size similar to Australopithecines or Australopithecines. And me and you have actually discussed that in our last interview as well. And I believe you argue that actually the naledi actually has a larger brain size than typical Australopithecines.
Well, it depends on what some of the composite skull they put together had. The first one had 465 cubic centimeters, so that would be in the Australopithecine range. The one Donny skull, the last one, LES1, that had 610 centimeters cubed. So there could still be Australopithecine in that range. That's why I'm pointing out the example of Daniel Lyon. So you also have modern humans that are in that range today, that live historically, and he had very small hemispheres for his already brain, because a lot of it was cerebellum. It was very large, normal and small. So cerebral hemispheres is 391 centimeter cubes. So that's in the ape. So that's really small, but he had normal intelligence. That's saying this brain size doesn't determine your intelligence. If you create a human, it's very different. But what I was saying about, so I was pointing out, you have that. But what I was pointing out, there is something strange about some of these specimens in there, particularly postcranially, that the shoulder orientation was gibbon-like in what they've examined. The pelvis was flaring, like they say, like Lucy. And so they had some strange feature, humeral torsion in here, the relation to the distal axis of the humerus to the position of the humeral head was really very different, and they're outside the ape range too. So it wasn't going in any apish direction. It was going away from the Australopithecine. So it's more. So there was some strange things in the skeleton, and I believe that's where you can find, like that's what I was saying. There could be some. I believe it was in a goiter region or in the vicinity of it, where you have goiter, you have cretinism. Where you have cretinism, a certain percentage of population will, when you have, will have that as a developmental disorder of the, and affects the skeleton, and you get all strange effects. For instance, I've seen one picture of a man, I think it was a European one, a cretin, who had a sort of Lucy-like rib cage, you know, thin up here and a conically shaped out here, and that could affect the shoulder joints and things like that. So it's all these things that people aren't, they're not considering that. And so what I'm thinking is there could be, maybe not all of them, but there could be individuals there that were sick, or maybe they were put in a cave because they were sick, they were buried there when they died or something. We just don't know. And I think there's a trend in Georgia too. That's again in the goiter region where you expect a high incidence of cretinism. In fact, there's a lot of regions, even in Africa, we have this problem, and it's only historically because now you can treat it, or you give people iodine and to help stop this. And if even a person has cretinism, you're born, which means your thyroid gland isn't functioning properly, is not producing enough thyroid hormone, you can give them thyroid hormone like thyroxine. We used to give our dog that, so basically to kind of compensate for not producing it. So you can, if you know what it is. But in going back in time, people would have been probably ignorant of this, wouldn't have known what it was. And you see people with the goiter with big swollen necks, even in photos, you know, and you go back more hundreds of years more, or several thousand years, and who knows in these regions what people would have experienced. They didn't know what was going on. So that's what I'm saying. It's a possibility, and you know, I think the Georgia finds, apparently it was a cave complex that collapsed or something, because they, you know, and something like that. So they could have even been kept together there because they were sick humans. We know one of them was definitely sick because I think, as I showed you in the last video, where's my, here it is. This person here, look at the jaw and the upper and lower jaw. You have here the tooth sockets. See how it's been, they've been basically reabsorbed. Okay, so it clearly has something pathological, but it would take years for this to happen. And so no apish creature is going to look after their fellow ape like that. Only humans look after the fellow humans. So that indicates these were human, and I looked after them. But maybe they were kept together because they were deceased. We just don't know what was going on, you know. And so it could be that. So what they're finding in, say, Homo ledi, that I believe the postcranially, it shows there was something abnormal about these people because they had features. They don't go in any evolutionary direction. They're going away from being, they're more sort of, some features are more ape-like than apes and Australopithecines because they're pathological. So, and it doesn't make any evolutionary cells. It's like I think one evolutionist thought they were human and evolved to become more primitive again. So it's sort of become, it's a strange thing, and I think only pathology can really explain it, and cretinism explains it, because a lot of these things, the iliac flare is observed in cretinism.
Right.
You know, the funny rib cage, you know, yeah.
Right. And Naledi had other evidence as well, which also was going to say that you believe that there is other evidence that would indicate that Naledi is indeed human, such as, for example, the building fire and things like that.
Yeah.
So you would say this would be good reasons to think that this is that they are indeed human.
If Naledi did what with what Lee Berger said they do, if this is all confirmed, then and you know I can't say 100%, but it seems it's you know where those you know they were probably that only humans bury humans deliberately. and it seems like there were some burials there, but the engravings on the wall. The thing is, to get into that place, you wouldn't. It's very, very hard and difficult, and I just can't see that. Yeah, it seems that there's no way. They use fire, it seems like, to navigate, and they built fires in the cave system, and they make engravings into hard rock, similar to the Neanderthal engravings in Europe or Gibraltar, or somewhere. So to me, that's strong evidence. I mean, and I found like a stone shaped like a tool nearly with an associated hand, very close by to an associated hand in the burial thing or something like that. So that tells me that's kind of strong evidence. And so I think to me, it makes sense, and it's just a matter of, were the people buried there because they were sick by more healthier humans, or were all of them like that? I can't answer that, but I think there was a lot of pathology in that population, but whether all the people buried there were pathological, I don't know. But some of the finds clearly indicate something strange about the skeletons.
Right.
There are quite a few guys in that list that I just said that span this sort of in-between section here.
None of them actually takes that in-between section there. If you notice that this is trying to evolve them from one step to the next. But is there a clear succession between Australopithecines, one Australopithecine versus another? I mean, other than like slight variations, like similarities between Africanus and Prometheus, but I'm talking about like an actual step-by-step process like this.
No, you're just seeing variation. It may be like you're seeing variation in monkeys and apes here, existing monkeys and apes, a bit like that. You're not seeing any progression towards humanity. No, there's no progression.
Right.
We'll
move on. I just wanted to briefly ask that real quick.
Yeah.
That I don't think our pal Jeff here is gonna touch on, but I do know he's gonna touch on one of them. It's Lucy. Surprise.
Is humans and apes. So let's start with Lucy. So commonly known as Australopithecus afarensis. The skeleton was only about 40% complete. That's all they had of it, and it was discovered in 1974.
Okay, 40% complete, like of a full skeleton. Lucy is bilaterally symmetric. So like there's going to be a lot of that 40% that overlaps down the midline. Now, if they were completely, like hypothetically, two completely different, like a unique 40% that doesn't reflect, you might get, I don't know, a max of like 80% of the skeleton. But it also depends on how you're comparing, like how you're counting up the skeleton. Are you doing it by bones? Like, I don't think you need every rib to get a decent idea of what the animal looks like. Or are you doing it by mass? In which case, I think it's going to be significantly larger than 80% even, because if you look at how much of the skeleton is there, a lot of the bulk of the skeleton is going to come from like the pelvis, the vertebral column, the skull. Primarily the skull is missing in Lucy's specimen. You've got that right humerus, you've got a lot of the left humerus, you've got a lot of the right and left forearms. Mostly you're missing a lot of the hands and feet, you're missing the left femur, you're missing most of the fibula, kind of the shaft of the tibia. But you've got quite a lot going on here. Let's
All right. Essentially, she is challenging whether 40%. Now, interesting enough, the 40% number is actually the evolutionist number. Because I think if you actually consider what we actually have, it's actually much less. Like I think Dr. Jerry Bergman mentions like 22% of the actual skeleton. But the reason they push it to 40% is that if you have like the one femur, then you pretty much it's going to be a mirror version of it and that sort of thing. And so that's the reason why they push it to 40%. But however, she's trying to argue for that and push it further than 40% to claim 80%. And so, and she says it depends on how you look at it, whether you're looking at it by mass, by bones. Exactly how do you view the as far as the content here?
I probably because time's going by. I don't want. This this part is probably not that important. To be honest, it doesn't really matter to me. I wish more there was more of it. I wish we could see the proper head, the foot bones, and a lot of the things like that. So there is a bit of it, but we're not. Yeah, it's sort of. Yeah, I don't want to argue too much about it because I'm really.
Right.
It doesn't really matter that where people have different interpretations.
It does sound like she's trying to create more evidence than actually is there. And she said, well, a lot of it would come from the skull and and then she admits right after she sees that skull, which said, well, most of the skull is missing.
Yeah. The thing is that even if you have more of it, it's not necessarily more evidence for what. It's just more bones. It could be evidence. It just indicates more what it would look like if you had more bones.
Yeah.
And although they have from other afarensis specimens, they found bones, but there could be a lot of variability within that group. So you can't. Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, though, on the 40%, this is actually the number of the evolutionists themselves. I've actually been on their sites. That they promote the 40% number. That's the reason why we end up doing the 40% number, because that's the one that most evolutionists would promote. Obviously, personally, she's just trying to push it to make it look like we have more evidence than we do. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Like you said, that one is not too important. But I just wanted to comment on that because she does make a big deal of that, obviously.
Let's let him tell us why it's bad, though.
They dated Lucy at about 3 million years old and claimed that she was bipedal and walked upright. However, we've got major problems with this, admitted by the evolutionists themselves. Did Lucy really walk upright? So Eric Stockstad, an evolutionist, published this article in Science in 2000, and he said, I walked over to the cabinet, pulled out Lucy, and Shazam, she had the morphology that was classic for knuckle walker. So in other words,
okay, well, you know what? Let's let him finish here.
When Lucy wasn't swinging around in trees, she was on the ground, walking around on all fours like chimpanzees do, because they're designed to be knuckle walkers. They have special locking wrists that humans don't have, so they can walk around and do that. And there's a picture of a chimp doing what chimps do, knuckle walking on the ground.
Okay, so Stockstad and also Brian Richmond are two of our big guys who were these knuckle walking proponents for Australopithecus afarensis back in the early 2000s, so 2000, 2001, etc. I believe Straight was also involved on this, and they do it based off of some particular notching that's going on in like the carpals and the distal end of the radius. This has not stood the test of time because a lot of the knuckle walkers that they assessed in their study, and this was noted by, I think it was Lovejoy and colleagues later on, a lot of the specimens that are known for knuckle walking are actually like missing the notch, right? And a lot of the organisms that, I believe, some of the organisms that are not knuckle walkers had partial notches. So it doesn't do a good job. Like the primary characteristic that Brian Richmond and that Stockstad and that Straight were relying on to distinguish knuckle walkers from non-knuckle walkers is not actually a diagnostic characteristic in the carpals. And I also know this because one of my colleagues actually works on hands. She studies hominoid hands, so the hands of extant gibbons, ape, like all of the great apes, so like Pongo, gorilla, canins, and humans. And she actually published, like she's published on the material of like Hominoleti. She does this, she pretty much knows hands like very well. Chimpanzees and gorillas knuckle walk in different ways. So that absolutely wrecks this idea of a knuckle walking ancestor for the sake of parsimony. They've actually evolved knuckle walking uniquely because the mechanism is actually separate. And that would also explain why the singular notch isn't very good at distinguishing and discriminating knuckle walkers from non-knuckle walkers. But more importantly than all,
we're going to go ahead and discuss what she just said on that. Do you have something to discuss on that? Or
yeah, I don't particularly, again, I don't really, it doesn't really, I don't know the details of, I know about the study, but I don't know all the fine details and what's been done since and how many specimens have this. But to me, it's not, whether Lucy, what knuckle walk or not, I don't honestly know. The thing is, not all apes knuckle walk. Orangutans don't, use their palms. Gibbons, I think, they just drag their arms, or I don't know. So it's only, so I don't see the necessarily Lucy had to be a knuckle walker. She may have walked on all fours. She may have. I don't know, but you know, she probably walked upright. But I think she was mainly designed to live in the trees, and probably walked. And when she walked up, and because like I said, it gets back to the pelvis or sacrum, which some say are human, which I believe, because you showed us that the sacrum's the body, indicates it wasn't designed to carry heavy loads, which means it didn't walk upright a lot. So it probably, so when I say she walked habitually upright or obligatory, I don't believe that's the case, because if you're obligatory, you'd have a large body and larger vertebrae on bottom to support you, because otherwise you just have totally back problems and things like that, and more stable pelvis, or the pelvis, the muscles, the gluteus, the iliac blades extend forward more to balance the body while you're upright. So I don't believe, but hand-assisted arboreal bipedalism in the trees, where you walk on branches, and that would, you know, having a flat, so probably had a flat foot, I think would have had some sort of divergent, opposable big toe to help to grasp and reach out, and, you know, help balance with one hand, get food with the other. That's the main. But like I said, if they get, but you know, they may find that they want to go to a different area in the forest, and they may have to go to the ground. So, you know, well, could have walked on all fours, but walked on the palms. It could have walked upright. Who knows? Because you can walk upright in the trees, you could probably walk on the ground to get to the next tree, and things like that. But I don't believe they lived on the ground, because they would just be a meal for predators. And that, if you live what the evolutionists say in their scenario, it was you know, tenfold worse for predators then than it was now. So that I don't see how they could have survived even that lifestyle. But in terms of knuckle walking, I'm kind of agnostic on that. It doesn't really matter much to me. You know, it's not a big deal. And you know, the thing was, Lucy wasn't a Australopithecine. It wasn't a chimp. Because you can see the pelvis, you can say it was not. The pelvis is so different from the chimpanzee pelvis. So you can't really, so to sort of say walk like a chimp, knuckle walk, is I wouldn't, you know, I don't know necessarily that, because of the anatomical differences. But I believe, like a lot of evolutionists do, that she was designed to live primarily in the trees. And if you live primarily in trees, you're not designed to walk like a human. You can't really have both, because humans designed with long legs and feet like we have cannot live in trees. We're not where we can't. Our survival doesn't depend on it. But you know,
what do you think about the locking risk? Is that evidenced of? I know it doesn't matter to you, but I'm just wondering. That I think she's arguing that some primates have locking wrists and some don't. Yeah. I think that's what she's arguing. But if you can, but the issue is not whether or not, you know, okay, granted, it doesn't have to have a locking wrist to be a knuckle walker. But then what if the evidence?
No, I mean, you don't have to have a, you can walk on all fours without having a locking mechanism, because like a orangutan can use their palms, you know, so you don't actually have to use that way. So it's not necessarily, even if you're walking fours, to have to walk on your knuckles. That's just gorillas and chimps mainly. You know,
I'm thinking that
and different primates may have used different methods and stuff like that, and you know, so that there's a lot of variety in how they got around. And I think most primates, you know, where they walk on foot, there seems like to be a combination. They can walk a bit upright, they can walk on all fours, right. And they may vary between them how much they can live in the trees, which is a primary way they're designed to live in the trees.
I'm thinking that the argument is actually in reverse, though. I think the idea is that, what if you have evidence that it does have a locking mechanism? not if it needs that locking mechanism,
Yeah.
but whether it actually has a locking mechanism. Would that be an indication of a knuckle walker?
Oh, sure. It would be indication of a knuckle walker. Yeah. But,
Yeah, I believe in our last discussion, our last interview, you referred to them as optionally bipedal, where they could be
yeah,
bipedal.
I think that's a term I prefer, because no one can prove that they were habitually obligatory. And so what we're seeing now with existing apes is it's optional, and chimps aren't very good at it. Gibbons are better. Orangutans, again, they walk a lot in trees bipedally. Hand assist are real bipedalism, and things like that. So it's just more an option. But I believe there was more variety, and evolutionists admit that the Australopithecines had variety of locomotion. But it seems that the more I look into it, apart from those that believe Lucy was all very walked all human-like and had left the tree life behind them, but I think that's more philosophy than anything else. I think most of the conclusion that most of Australopithecines were built to really have enough of body to live in the trees, and their lower body to, their feet and things like that would have suited a tree lifestyle. But they believe they walk bipedally. But the thing is, what is bipedally? It's just if you can walk up, you could say chimps are bipedal if they can walk. It's just a matter of how good you are at it. So it's a loaded term. God created primates apes with 2 legs. Well, you're supposed to walk on your head. That's what I'm saying. So basically, but I see the problem that evolution used this to bash creationists. I was saying, well, hey, if they can walk upright, that means they're on the way to becoming human. No, or they had a pelvis that looks superficially similar to human pelvis. That means that's a prediction they went on to become human. No, because look at this analogy. Last year, my Liverpool, my football team, beat Manchester United 7-0. That was a good day. But if I said to you, if I told you now, I predict that at some stage in that game, the score was 5-0, would you think I was really smart or clever? Was a prophet? No, because at some stage the score had to be 5-0 to become 7-0. And so what they're saying now, and so what they're using, predictions are made before the fact, before the events occurred, not after the outcome. It's easy then to say, oh, we predict this and that happened, because well, if something went from ape to human, certain thing the pelvis had to become human-like. They had to walk up by all these things, but that's just if there's a true, but it's not a prediction, because it had to happen because they know the outcome. So, but the thing is, predicting something when you don't know the outcome, the end result, and so after the fact predictions, to me, they're meaningless. It's just not.
I need to ask you about this, because during the chat when you were being interviewed by Donnie, Erika brought up the idea of, bipedalism is predicted by evolutionary model. I'm like, well, young Earth creationists can explain bipedalism as well.
Yeah.
It said, well, yeah, but they
Absolutely.
can accommodate it, but it's directly predicted by evolution. And I'm sort of thinking, wait a minute, isn't that like after the fact? Because we
absolutely.
already know that there are bipedal organisms.
Yeah.
We already know that there are quadrupedal organisms. And so you're trying to say, hey, look, evolution can explain this, so therefore it's a prediction of evolution. But like you said, after the fact, predictions are meaningless.
Yeah. It's
This is that Lucy's entire morphology is that of a biped and could not be that of a quadruped. Period. Biomechanically, it does not work. The foramen magnum is anterior and the position is forward. That's what you need for the foramen magnum to actually to characterize a biped to the exclusion of other types of locomotion within primates.
All right. I'm gonna ask you about the foramen magnum real quick before we move on. Just the foramen magnum is actually missing in Lucy. It's not present, and most of the skull is also missing. So why does she think that the foramen magnum is internal?
You mean anterior?
Anterior, yeah.
It's probably based on other skulls. That you. I think you have.
Afarensis.
I think you have. So this is an afarensis, the male afarensis skull here, and so it's probably based on that, something like that.
Do we have the foramen magnum of other afarensis skulls, or is that an interpretation? Do you think?
Well, I think this is apparently a male afarensis skull, and this here would indicate where it was. So it's sort of, I guess the problem with it is that it works fine for apes and humans, but when you look at as I mentioned Donnie yesterday, it depends on how you reference it, but this is Human Evolution Anatomy by Leslie Aleo and Christopher Dean, and so basically they use, because how forward it is. So basically they use the biotympanic line as a reference point. So it started to be sort of where the eardrums would be if they were preserved. And so they found, for instance, that you have the gorilla skull is quite positioned more backwards. So the Homo sapiens skull, is a bit forward to that, but you have Australopithecus africanus and Australopithecus boisei, or Australopithecus boisei, Paranthropus boisei, depending on which genus you put it in, is quite forward. And then you have other sort of skeleton where they put in a phantom category, Homo habilis or Homo erectus, are positioned more like the human. But then you have others that are positioned more forward. So basically, there's no evolutionary progression. So basically, if you're going by that, then basically the Australopithecus africanus and boisei, the robust Australopithecines, would be more bipedal than we are, and that sort of doesn't sort of stack up, So there's you got to be a little bit wary about it. Maybe they were by. I suspect they were more bipedal than because of their shorter legs, pelvis. They may have been better at it. They were probably better at it than chimps, and that's a pretty low bar to cross, because chimps aren't that great at bipedalism. Like I said, gibbons are much better. So yeah. But foramen magnum, it's an iffy thing to use that as a beyond existing apes, but in terms of the fossil record is a bit more iffy to say something is more bipedal by looking at that position there. So yeah.
So you would say that a lot of what she's saying, for start with, she's basing this on the skulls of other afarensis, because obviously she can't be basing it on Lucy, since most of the skull is missing and the foramen magnum is not present, so there's nothing to show that what it looked like in Lucy. But so she has to be getting this from other afarensis, but then she's also interpreting those, and if I'm understanding you correctly, are you saying that particular interpretation of the foramen magnum in afarensis is actually disputed among evolutionists?
Well, I'm saying that how you measure this is disputed, or like how do you determine it, and is it an accurate indicator? I think from I don't have all the information ahead of me, but I think there's problems with, for instance, is it like I may be wrong, but I think if I can go to Australopithecus ramidus, which they claim also, well, to some degree bipedal, but yeah, the thing is, it works for human and apes, but for the fossil record, it's sort of all over the place. And I guess you can interpret that, but then if you're really saying that the forward position, then you have to say that the robust Australopithecine africanus were better bipeds than we are, which would be stupid. So I don't think there's any simple way of doing it, because the thing is, you may have different cranial, the region, the knuckle plane maybe shorter or longer in different species. And, you know, the cranial base may be different in lengths and things like that. So how you reference it and work it all out, and there's a lot of things to take into account in determining this scenario. You know, how forward jutting were the jaws and stuff like that. You know, what muscle attachments needed to sort it out. So where would the balancing point be? You know, so there's things like that.
Right. It also wouldn't take away the evidence that you presented earlier about if they stayed upright too long, it would apply pressure on a certain spot right there on the top of that. Was it the pelvis region?
Yeah, the sacrum, the body, like if they walked. Well, I don't believe they could run like we did, but if I were upright all the time, it puts a lot of pressure on that point. And that's why we have big lumbar vertebra, the body, and a more bigger. See in the human ones, they're much. That point here, that point here is bigger than in the equivalent point. Can you see them?
Yeah.
They're kind of, if I match them up, they're kind of, even if you scale them for weight, the Lucy one will be small. Okay. And basically, in specimens like Sediba and Africanus are even smaller than Lucy. So, and together with other factors, it wouldn't. It just indicate that they wouldn't have been walking a lot because when you walk, you put more pressure on because you hit the ground and sort of, so you get the shock as well. So basically, it just seems unlikely, just from looking at that.
And just to be clear for everybody, your argument is that that you would have no problem if the evidence supported Lucy as being able to walk bipedally. That would not be an issue for you because it'd be a non-issue basically. Because God could have easily created a bipedal type ape, and there are organisms outside of human that are bipedal, like birds, for example, are bipedal. Yeah. But they now, of course, they don't walk the exact same way as humans, and so any primate that is bipedal, optionally bipedal or whatnot. Then,
I think that. Yeah, I think optional should be the word. I think most of these would be optional. The fossil record and bipedalism, because if you think about it logically, if God was obsessed with making the primates or apes walk on fours, he would have. Why not just create 4 legs? So as I was saying, that you got 2 legs for a reason, and he created them with versatility so they could live in the trees. But if you wanted to move from one forest to another or trees to another, and the gap was big, you'd need to get on the ground. And so some of them walk on knuckles, some don't, but they could still walk upright. And gibbons can run upright, and all extant apes can walk bipedally if they need to, but they don't use it that much. But they can, and so it's an optional way, and I think that's what they were designed for. Now, the Australopithecines, like I said, they were different to existing apes, and so basically, probably they were better at it than chimps. So I don't have any problem with that. In fact, I say even if they could walk like humans, I would say so what? Because you're saying God can't. He's not clever enough to use a similar design pattern in an ape or whatever. This is the thing, I think people have a lock on this, that it's sort of like, but think about, God created 2 eyes in a lot of different creatures. Does that mean they evolved? Is that proof of evolution? It's the same sort of argument. Not that I believe there is any evidence that any creature has got the same, that there is any ape or apish primate, which I looks like that. But I'm saying people got to look at it in perspective, not get hang up on this because it's not a big deal. Well,
Right.
maybe to
That's what I was
people.
gonna,
To me, it isn't.
That's what I was going to say. That basically, you would see that okay, you basically be less like me. Like, if the evidence supported they're bipedals, okay,
Yeah.
and even if they were bipedal, this wouldn't necessarily prove evolution or the human and apes are
No.
related or anything like that.
But let's say they when you because this is the problem to me when you say if they were bipedal. But the thing is, what does bipedal mean? Because I've already talked about probably all apes are bipedal. They are optionally bipedal. And likely Australopithecines were all optionally bipedal. So when you say bipedal, I think the terminology is it's a bad in a sense, because if you say if they were bipedal, it's like you say you don't, well, we don't mean it, but it's like inferring they only walked on all fours, and that's not in true existing apes. So it's a terminology. So maybe they weren't sort of obligatory bipedal like we are, but they were likely optionally bipedal, and that is existing apes, and so take that word away from the evolutionists that they can't equate that the bipedalism belongs to them. They're so ape men because they're supposed ape men because the existing apes are bipedal optionally, and there's no they haven't shown definitive evidence that the Australopithecines were even obligatory, and even if they were, so what? But the thing is, any creature that has of its prime mode of life living in the trees and is built for that, I can't see how you can say it's habitually or obligatory bipedal, because if it's spending most of its life in the trees, it's almost mutually exclusive. You wouldn't assign something to be. God wouldn't assign, probably unlikely to to be really efficient like we are walking, because that means you wouldn't be efficient living in trees. And like I said, I don't think they would have survived if they couldn't live in trees efficiently. But anyhow, but so yeah, they weren't. There's no evidence that doesn't seem to indicate they were obligatory bipedal creatures, although optionally. But that is no big deal, because we have it today, and in the evolutionary timelines, millions of years before, there are claims of that. There's actually they're claiming they were habitually bipedal even millions of years before the existing Australopithecines, which makes even the habitual claims by evolutionists nothing special, because if it already existed way before that, then why are the Australopithecines more special than apes before them, supposedly? But I doubt that the other apes too were habitually bipedal, because for the same reason, if they're built in the trees, they were probably optionally bipedal. But evolution like to exaggerate the claims and things like that, because if they don't, then the whole thing collapses.
The bowl-shaped pelvis was sagittally oriented iliac blades.
Okay, we kind of already discussed that, but that's
Yeah.
not true, is it? I just wanted to verify that the human and the actually, could you show that up on the screen real quick? I just want to be able to people see that comparison. Where the comparison between the human and the that, and see that she says that it has the bowl-shaped pelvis. Obviously, humans have that. Is that true for Lucy?
No, you can see that that humans have the more the bowl shape, it curves around the vertebral column. Lucy's pelvis is not bowl shaped. There's a little bit of curve there. I don't know how, and the thing is, I don't even know how accurately this is reconstructed, right? Because I'm not. This is bone clones. I mean, they do great stuff with this, but they have to rely on someone else's interpretation for how a lot of these things. I don't even know how that, but it's more going sideways, because this pelvis is smaller, but it's broader. If you hold it there, it's actually broader than I don't know if you can see that, but it's actually wider than the human pelvis, because the human pelvis, it curves around. It curves around more. And this one is actually one that's described as having upper flaring ilia, more the upper part. So this is probably more flaring than normal even. and so even this, but it's more bowl shaped. This isn't bowl shaped. And I know they like to think that, but and then this is evolutionists that are saying this, so it's not so that it's more sort of orientation is more chimp-like than it is human-like in terms of how these things flare out. They curve around a little bit, but nothing like it does in humans. Okay, and they don't extend forward. See, and that's one of the problems, and keep so the muscles can't sort of give proper balance to the body and standing in an erect position. Okay, so that's one of the things with it. Yeah. So there's that. So that is no big deal, and yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I just want people to see that and see the comparison that he actually does not have the bowl-shaped pelvis that humans have. Obviously, human actually has a bowl-shaped pelvis, and the iliac blades are also different. Isn't that correct? That's a little bit more flatter. Yeah, I think you said.
Yeah, they're more flatter, and they go, instead of curving around, they go sideways. Like I said, they're not bowl-shaped. They just curve a little bit, and they're sort of different orientation.
And that's the evolutionist reconstruction of Lucy's pelvis on top of that. So it's their interpretation.
Yeah. We've got to go on what they do. I don't, most of them kind of do a fair job. But there are some groups that really push the human thing, and with that, I'd be a bit more careful about accepting their interpretation or reconstruction. Yeah.
And it has an anterior inferior iliac spine, which is a critical muscle attachment site for maintaining stability, being upright.
Okay, does it have an interior iliac spine? Exactly.
Well, I think I think she pointed it out that it may well have had. If I take her word for it. So looking at it, so that would be posterior view here, so that would be this point here, okay, and that would be the point in human. So it does have that spine, yeah, okay. So the one it's a lot better. It's more pronounced than you, a lot more pronounced than the human.
Right. She's trying to argue that would indicate upwalk movement. What would you say to that?
Well, I'm not an expert on that, but it's countered by, again, that you have these ligaments here that bind the ischium and the sacrum together are very weakly developed, which indicates that this wasn't stabilized very well. So if it walked a lot upright, this joint here, this joint wasn't very stable. So I don't know enough about how the iliac spine affects bipedalism that I don't really want to comment on if I don't know too much about it. Right. So I may leave it at that.
Right.
Strengthens the pelvis for the bowl shape of the pelvis, not the spine, not the anterior inferior iliac spine. I mean, she had a valgus knee, the carrying angle that allows you to hold your weight in a singular column. She had.
I do want to ask you about that. The valgus knee. This has to do with the well disputed femur, the kneecap. That the way it slants up or something like that, or down. I don't know how it slants exactly, but the essence of it is that it's this way, and therefore it indicates that she at least was upward movement. Does primates have that valgus knee exactly?
Well, I think like she's probably referring to the carrying angle, that the femurs kind of move inwards from the pelvis. They move so it puts the center of mass more in the midline of the body, and the femurs angle in, and so it's carrying angle. And so in a carrying angle of chimps, it'd be close to 0. Okay, and humans, it varies, but it's up around 11 degrees or something. In orangutans, it's about 5 degrees or something. Oddly enough, I found that Lucy, if the measurements are correct, I read is about 12 to 15 degrees or something like that. So it's actually more than humans. And I don't know whether that's because, and I don't know whether that's the reason why some says she was a super pipette, which is kind of more laughable. But anyhow, but I think it's also related. She had a funny anatomy. You know, the neck of the femur was quite long, and basically, but the femur was short. The legs were short, but the pelvis for a size was relatively broad. So you know that. So basically, maybe you needed. I don't know how. So I don't know that it reflects any great efficiency in bipedalism, but it probably. But you know you know it, like even orangutans have some carrying angles. So I don't think it's such a big deal. You know, it's just sort
Dr.
of.
Jerry Bergman had told me that that the knee you would expect some similarities because the knee actually is designed to protect that area. So you would expect some similarities between the knee and like a chimpanzee or a Z or whatever, a human. You would expect at least some similarities in the joints. Is that
Yeah.
would you would say too that I'd expect at least some similarities?
Yeah, well, yeah. The thing is that there are similarities. You know, it's not, you know, how your knees angle in doesn't affect your humanity. So it's sort of like it's not a big deal. You know, some people, you know, it's just I think for them it's a big thing because anything that shows they're closer to the human angle or whatever. But the thing is that humans had longer legs and stuff like that. So you're measuring something equivalent, but in a creature with short legs and a kind of more broader pelvis. So and the femur's head is the neck's different, bit different, longer. So there's differences which affect how the carrying angle is. So it may have to be that larger because you know, for it to basically walk in any efficient manner at all. So you know, and as a guide use variety, but yeah, again, it's not a big deal. So yeah,
right.
Although I'm sure they want to make a big deal out of it.
Right.
Big toe and the 3 arches in the foot.
Okay, this one, this was almost laughable. Say she had an inline big toe and 3 arches in the foot. My guess, she doesn't say this directly right here, but my guess is that, and I think she does go into the Tola prints right after this. But she's getting that from the Tola footprints because there is no feet. And so she's getting that from the Tola footprints, and she's fixing to go into that. Real quickly though, I do want to ask, what do you have on the feet exactly? On the feet of the
well, I think that basically from what I've read, the evolutionist who believes that the Lucy did have an inline big toe, so non-opposable, but the evidence is very ambiguous, and the data's come out shows she probably had some mobility in a big toe, so I don't think it was in line, and so I think they're basing it all on the low Tola footprints basically, but that's one of the reasons why, like with Littlefoot, which is stated about 10,000 supposedly years before the low Tola footprints, they're probably so keen on wanting that to be in line because then they can say there is a creature that has toes that were in line before that. But that can be interpreted also, even with the additional bones, it can easily be interpreted to be divergent to some degree. An evolutionist called Lewis, I don't know if he's still alive, he was an expert on the foot, and he did the OH8 foot, which is sort of an apish foot that's usually associated with Australopithecines, with the robust Australopithecines or whatever. And the similar arguments apply, that you have a joint, what looks like a joint facet between the first and second metatarsal, that around the bottom, around the base region, but that's caused by fibrous tissue, ligaments, and stuff like that acting on it, and you can, and it shows that, and you can, and so you basically, if you allow for room for that, you'll find that it can be interpreted as being divergent, and so basically these go up in smoke, and so you have to basically, so there's, it's probably pretty much all reliant on the low Tolly footprints, but the thing is now with the side A ones, it shows there is some footprints with divergence there, so that indicates perhaps there were some Australopithecines there. Like I said, if they could walk optionally bipedal, then that could well explain those prints. They could walk, but the other ones, I believe, humans, they could have been. They didn't have to be sort of people with large feet. There are, kids don't have large feet either, so it doesn't have to be, at big adults walking. And the thing is, if you want to talk about parsimony, the simplest explanation is, if it looks human and it looks different from afarensis, then it probably was human. And the other ones, if they looked like they had divergent toes, then that probably was like an ape-like creature. And if they found these Australopithecine bones in that area, although I don't think you found them directly associated with the footprints, but that could indicate perhaps that the Australopithecines
I think
those ape prints.
I think the arguments that she uses on, and this is probably a common argument that's used by other evolutionists as well, is quite circular. Like for example, she'll assume like since they date the prints to like, I think was it 3 million years or something like that, and since no humans were around, therefore this had except Australopithecines, and therefore Australopithecines.
That's begging the question.
Exactly.
That's the same as over the brain size. If you only accept brains below a certain cranial capacity into Homo erectus, then of course you're going to get a small brain species. But there is actually one skeleton, the Kadanamu skeleton, found in Ethiopia, which they assigned to afarensis, but it's a very modern, but it's dated about 3.58 million years or something ago, supposedly. So that would be around the time of these footprints, and basically, but there was no head and no foot and hand bones associated with it, so you can't make a definite diagnosis. But so they were assigned to afarensis because that's supposedly the only thing there, and it had, because it had long legs and stuff, so it had more human-like features. So they tell us that. But there's even some evolutionists dispute whether it's assigned to, I don't say it's human, but I decided, does it really belong to afarensis, because they couldn't diagnose it. So that's a potential human right there. You have it. But if they accept that as human, then goodbye human evolution, at least the current storyline. So they can't accept it, and but to me, you can't. You're arguing if you're saying that it can't be human because no one's dated it. Well, we don't accept the dates anyhow.
Right. But they're saying that no humans were around at the time. Well, obviously, in YFC position, we actually do think humans and Australopithecines were around at the same time. So it's only if she assumes her position, which is what she's doing. She's assuming her to argue for.
Because they're from her point of view, she's totally sold on evolution. That is the truth of the universe, and so it has to go in that way. But the problem is, I guess we all have, I admit I'm being biased, so we all view the world from our own lenses. But it's, I guess it's when you step outside those lenses and then you see what's you can be more objective. But if you only view it through one lens only, then I guess she has no alternative but to accept that they weren't human, because
All right, let's.
And what Tompkins is going to go on here, so he's going to be like, oh, we didn't find any hands and feet with Lucy, and the Laetoli footprints are far away from Lucy, so arguing that Lucy's kind made these footprints is ridiculous. No, it is not, because we have Australopiths that are dated to the time period of the late Woolly footprints, and Australopiths are the only thing living at that time that has the foot morphology that matches that we see at the late Woolly footprints.
Okay, what we have here is a double circular argument.
Yeah,
First
I think we just
we mentioned
just discussed that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The first thing was what we already discussed, that she's assuming that people weren't around at the time. The second one, she assumes that Lucy's feet match that of the Australopithecines, the very thing that she has to prove.
Yeah.
She has to verify the fact
Yeah.
that Lucy made those prints, and
Yeah,
she
yeah.
assumed that Lucy must have made those prints because they were around. I don't think
Yeah.
around it.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's
Yeah,
kind
you're
of like a double
assuming what you're
circular
trying to prove.
argument.
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
You're assuming what you're trying to prove. At least we have the creations. We know we have human feet, and those footprints match human feet, and
Right.
so that's the simplest explanation.
Right.
And there's no proof that any other creature had human-like feet.
Right.
And so so if they were really true to their objective and it was all about science, then I would consider that option, but they can't, because it's really not in the end about science. It's about philosophy, religion, worldview, whatever you want to call it. That's what it's about.
Right.
It's not about science. That's my experience anyhow.
Right.
A condition that is intermediate to how chimpanzees walk bipedally and how anatomically modern hunter-gatherers unshuffle.
These aren't intermediate prints. Exactly why do they think that they're intermediate? The ones that are clearly human, that is. I think you mentioned multiple sites, and there is a site that looks like it might be Australopithecines made it. But why do they think why does she think that it's intermediate? Is the toes spread apart a little bit more, or they're questioning whether it's diversion or not, or what?
I don't know, because there's different schools and thought, even the low tide footprint. Some have different interpretations of afferensis. So some actually accept that they didn't actually walk like human, that they had a more bent hip, bent knee gait, more like an ape gait. And they realize that if these are like humans, they couldn't have made the prints, if you accept them as modern human prints, they couldn't have been made by something like that. So they analyzed it. So there's an analysis that sort of go into really fine esoteric detail and find something that indicates maybe there was a pronounced more strike on the heel or something like that indicates that they weren't quite human, and so would support their theory that these creatures didn't quite walk like human-like, but the way we thought Afarensis walked. And so you have a group that believe that, and so I don't know whether she believes that or not. And then you have another group that believes she walks exactly like a human. And then you have one group that believe that these footprints weren't made by, like Russell Tuttle is an expert in it. He doesn't believe they were made by Afarensis because they're too modern, and so it must have been by something else. But he can't say it's human because they didn't exist. So you have these different schools of thought, really. Yeah.
Right.
God walk bipedally. Now, then he complains about the nature of the recreation for Lucy. We could corroborate that with other Australopiths that they will never bring up. They're not going to talk about Australopithecus sediba and how we have the entire half of the pelvis for Australopithecus sediba that corroborates the reconstruction of Lucy. They're not going to talk about STW 573, which we have almost 100% of that skeleton.
Okay, 573 is referring to Prometheus. Which of course Prometheus looks entirely primate. The only thing that's really heavily in dispute is its foot, because it's got a single foot with it that some people question whether it's diversion or not. Now, the original discoverer of Prometheus Clark actually did say that it was diversion. You talk about this in your book Apes to Ancestors, and you mentioned that that Clark, and I actually seen the paper on this, that Clark does actually recognize the fact that it was. Now, Clark actually tried to say the rest of the foot was transitional, but the irony of it is that he actually admitted it had a divergent big toe, like apes. Yeah,
I think people kind of you get people have different opinions on different parts of the foot. When he found the new foot bones, he claimed that the cuneiform bones were more ape-like than human-like, the ones he found, and so he didn't seem to deviate from his position that these were the divergent position. So I don't know. So I and then the other one who was on the paper with him when I did this was Philip Tovia. So none of these are novices in basically reconstructing fossil bones. So the coming on later and telling them that I think De Silva in his paper said that initially they gave the illusion of divergency or hallucinal mobility, but I don't think so. You know, it seemed like the concave proximal end of the first metatarsal fitted nicely into the convex end of the medial cuneiform, which is the main where it attaches to, and that was, according to the originals, Clark and them, that seemed to be indicated it was divergent. And so the only thing that's really affected is that the intermediate cuneiform doesn't actually tap, but it connects to the medial cuneiform, but not to the first metatarsal. It's the only other thing. You have the second metatarsal, the base of that, and that's where there's a facet there which indicate they were locked together with the first metatarsal. But as I mentioned earlier, you have Lewis looked at this problem with another foot AIHH, which has had the same interpretation things, but it has all the bones there, relevant bones, and he's saying it's, you know, that it's like a pseudo arthrosis or like a false joint in a way, caused by sort of ligaments and stuff, causing, you know, the bursitis or fibrous tissue rubbing against each other. So that there's kind of ligaments. So there's ligaments involved, and if you make allowance for that, you'll actually you can get divergency there. And the thing to remember, the Australopithecines weren't necessarily apes, existing apes. They were different primate group.
She mentioned Sediba's hip, Sediba's pelvis, corroborating with Lucy's pelvis. Well, that doesn't really matter because Lucy's pelvis doesn't really match that of human pelvis anyhow, right?
No, and apparently the Sediba, the top of the sacrum, the body is smaller than that of Lucy, so it wasn't any better at basically walking upright. If that's an indicator, than Lucy was, you know.
Right.
And they've examined the bones, and that Sediba was definitely built for living in the trees. So basically, and the thing is, the only foot bones found have been, the only relevant foot bones were not really relevant, metatarsal 4 and 5. So there's nothing that can, one way or the other, indicate whether it's divergent or not, the toes, because there's no footprints. Right. There's no foot bones that would tell you one way or the other. Right. But it had a, according to the very primitive heel calcaneus lateral plantar process, which sort of the bottom of the heel, the posterior end of it, that sticks out or whatever, or in that area had certain things there that were supposed to be very primitive, more primitive than Australopithecus afarensis. So, which means they have a problem, because then if it was an ancestor-descendant relationship, then why was Sediba less evolved than afarensis?
Including the foot that shows it has an inline big toe and suggests the 3 arches in the foot as well. They're not going to talk about the Dakika chow. They're going to skip all of this because they can't deal with it.
All right. She is going to argue here. I definitely want to talk about this because this is so funny and so ironic. She says that we're never going to talk about Australopithecines. We're never going to talk about Prometheus. We're never going to talk about Sediba. We're never going to talk about all these things. And the funny thing is that you wrote a book here, and it's co-authored also by Dr. Tompkins and Dr. Jerry Bergman. And I've talked about it on this channel. I know Donnie's talked about it on his channel. He had you interview on that as well. And we discuss this stuff all the time. We bring this stuff up. I bring up Prometheus every time I discuss it. So what she's saying is completely. I know why she's saying it,
Yeah.
because she's trying to make it look like the evidence is so good, we're just not going to even talk about that stuff. But that's not the case, is it? We bring it up all the time.
No, I mean, look, I respect her in the terms of she seems to have a lot of knowledge and things like that, and great enthusiasm. So she seems like a likable person. But yeah, no, not scared to talk about these things. That sometimes we talk too long about them. That's my problem, and my wife, I can see there, is wanting me to wrap it up. But yeah, and spend too much time on it. And I like mysteries, and so we don't have every answer in the book. There's a lot of things in this world you don't have every answer for. But evolutionists don't have either, and there's a lot of things. And I'd rather be in our position. We don't have to explain how it all created itself out of nothing, for nothing, by nothing, and without purpose, design. This is what it gets down to. And the Australopithecines, just to me, they're just an extinct apish primate group, and there's a huge gap between them and say Homo erectus, which has a neck down, essentially modern human post-cranial skeleton, basically, and the head more robust. Well, they had a more robust skeleton too, but that's but I think that's more a discussion for another day.
Right.
Maybe in the future we can just talk more about that.
Right.
You can't actually fit it into their model because it patently denies quadrupedalism for these hominids.
Of course, we've already dealt with this. Our position doesn't essentially have to require whether they are bipedal or quadrupedal. This is kind of an absurd argument that she's making here. It doesn't make any sense.
What did you say? What did you say again?
She said that that all of this denies them as quadrupedal, and therefore we can't handle that if it turns out that they're not quadrupedal. Our position doesn't. Our position actually doesn't disallow.
I'm not big on the quadrupedal. I mean, it doesn't worry me one way or the other. But I don't have no problem with them walking upright. Right. But you also have to look at it, the anatomy, and say how did they walk, so you can't just spin it and say they walk like humans if their body weren't designed for it. And if it was designed for living in trees, then walking upright, they weren't probably obligatory upright walkers, because if you spend most of your time in trees, because that wouldn't, that just doesn't seem to fit, and their anatomy doesn't seem to indicate they weren't designed for that. But I accept they walk upright, because you see apes today walking upright. So no one really denies that apes can't walk upright. It's just about the degree and the variation, and and God created a lot of variation, and so that's not a big deal, and
right.
That's what two legs are for, walking upright, whether it's in the trees or on the ground, but some apes walk on knuckles or walk on palms, fine. That monkeys and whatever, that's fine too. There's a lot of variability there. For another day. Keep in touch. It's been a pleasure.
It has been great. I enjoyed our discussion, just like last time, and I enjoyed your discussion with Donnie on Standing for Truth. That was awesome. There was a lot of great discussions in the chat. Erika from Gutsy Gibbons showed up, and we had some good discussions back and forth. So it always makes some great discussions and that sort of thing. But anyway, like you said, it's getting late, and so we're gonna go ahead and call it quits right here. And thank you again, and I appreciate you for joining on my channel.
Have a good day. Take care. God bless.
God bless. God bless.
Yep.
The second interview includes that of an interview, the pre-recorded interview I had with Dr. Jerry Bergman. I know it's been a long one because I've got 2 interviews in this video concerning 2 different subject matters, but they're closely related, but I wanted to include them all in one video. So expect probably about a 3-hour video, but that's unfortunate, but it can't be helped. But I've got 2 separate interviews, so if you want to watch like one and then watch the other later, And you could determine which you can drop me a comment below if you wanted to say, hey, which one you like better. The one I did, but I do include some stuff in the one with Dr. Jerry Bergman. I do include some stuff that we went over with Dr. Peter Line as well. But the reason why I decided to keep that in there is because that way you can have kind of like two different perspectives toward that same question or responding to Erika on that particular clip. And so I decided to keep Dr. Jerry Bergman in there, and so we can, get two different views on responding to Erika. So it's pretty cool. And also, he's going to be also he'll be discussing Australopithecines, but he's also going to be discussing Neanderthals. So that's why I'm going to include that in this video, because it's all related. And so, without further ado, let's dive in to see Dr. Jerry Bergman, who has like 9 different degrees. I'm not going to go over them. I did one in one of my other channels, but he has like 9 different degrees. I know we don't do an introduction for Dr. Jerry Bergman like we did with Dr. Peter Line early in this video, but that's okay. We did an introduction for him on one of my other videos. In addition to that, you could probably read his, go online and read Dr. Jerry Bergman's, probably creation.com, CMI's website. You probably can go to others that like ICR and things like that, and just read up on Dr. Jerry Bergman. He has like 9 different degrees, and he's taught just about in a wide variety of subject matter, including on anatomy. So it's kind of cool to have Dr. Jerry Bergman in there discussing this as well. He especially has spoken on this matter lots of times, especially on Neanderthals. So I think it's interesting to include his comments in there as well. So without further ado, let's get to the interview with Dr. Jerry Bergman. All right, we're going to switch gears, and we're going to respond to what she said on Australopithecines and Neanderthals.
So this is typically a typical figure that you might see. And basically you see apes there at the start. You see humans there at the end. But essentially everything in between is hypothetical and theoretical. That's all we really see in the fossil record anyway.
Wrong, Jeff. You are wrong there. We have Sahelanthropus, Australopithecines, Ardipithecus cadavra, Ardipithecus ramidus, Australopithecus anamensis, Australopithecus afarensis, Australopithecus barroghazali, Australopithecus diurnida, Australopithecus garhi, Australopithecus africanus, Australopithecus sediba, Homo habilis, Neanderthals platyos, Homo rhodophensis, Homo erectus, potentially Homo georgicus, Homo erectus, potentially Homo ergaster, Homo erectus sensu-lato, Homo naledi, Homo floresiensis, Homo heidelbergensis, Homo rhodesiensis, Homo godoensis, Neanderthalensis, Homo neanderthalensis, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens.
All right, so essentially, she is elephant hurdling these list of various finds that have been made by evolutionists, and she saying, oh, well, we have those in-between states, those transitional forms. And the bad part about elephant hurling is that it doesn't deal with it tries to win the argument by quantity rather than quality. And so it doesn't actually deal with each one of these individual claims. And there's all kinds of issues. Yep.
In this book here, I would carefully evaluate with several thousand references, the paleontological literature. We carefully evaluate all these claims and find they are invalid. Even this picture, you will notice that the first 3 are clearly apes. All of a sudden, we go from an ape to a human, number 4. And so even in these diagrams they produce, which of course are based on bone fragments at best. And what we did for this book, by the way, which Tompkins is one of the authors, so she's probably not going to appreciate that. But what we did in the book is basically we looked at the peer-reviewed paleontological literature. And I have my theory, my ape man link. You have yours. I criticize yours because I think mine is better. You criticize mine because you think yours is better. And so what we did is we took the criticism of each other's and basically summarized in chapters on each of these main so-called missing links. So in other words, you effectively shot mine down, but I still believe in evolution. So I accept my idea, but I don't accept your theory. And I know you believe in evolution as well, and I do too. So therefore, I show flaws in your theory, and I say my is better. You say yours is better. We effectively criticize each other, even though we still accept each other's theory. And the problem is, most of these are based on skull fragments. They're not based on the bodies. And you can see that's why when you show these pictures here, you can see that the change, the evolution is in the skull. It's not in the body so much. Even in the second and third picture here from the circle, you can see the circle is clearly an ape. The second and third picture, the bodies are pretty modern. What's different is the ape head. And so basically, because we don't have much detail, we have a few cases like Lucy, of course, one of the most famous. And what's that little foot? Is it the other one?
Mm-hmm.
But anyways,
Prometheus.
So we have indeed some evidence of the body, but not enough to really make the case. And so big problem. And again, her criticism primarily is name calling. She listed all these finds, but most of these finds, even paleontologists will admit are problematic, and therefore ignores reality. She believes in evolution. She believes we evolved from apes. Therefore, she sees in the data what she believes. And if you look at the data objectively, you can see it doesn't support, as other paleontologists agree, it doesn't support the claims that we're trying to make,
right,
or they're trying to make.
A couple things. One, I got your book.
Oh, great.
His ancestors. Okay. I really appreciate that. Thank you for sending me that. I sent you a thank you email, but I don't know if you got it or not. But thank you for sending me that book. I've been reading it. It's awesome. And that, like you said, Tompkins is one of the authors. I know he authored the chapter on the genetic comparisons and things like that, between chimps and humans. The second thing I was going to bring up, I was going to ask a question about Littlefoot. I heard recently that one evolutionist claimed that it wasn't, that Littlefoot couldn't have been a chimera because it was found in stone in a cave. Is that correct? Is it found? But when I looked it up, I actually discovered that there were other fossils that were found with it, namely Africanus, I think it was. It was found with it in the same cave, but he says it was found in limestone. So he said it couldn't possibly be a chimera. How would you respond to that?
Well, I find it's intriguing. It was found in limestone, and they had to chip the limestone away very carefully because they ended up chipping some of the bone away. And they ended up, I don't know, it took them what, 4, 5, 6 years to totally separate it. And it's almost impossible to prove, considering the specimens they found, that indeed all of these belong to one person. And so it doesn't surprise me that there are claims of people who are professional paleontologists who say, wait a minute, all these bones did not belong to one single person. They belong to different persons. And that's a problem which they have with that example. And that's a problem. It's hard for them to prove, indeed, all of these belong to the same creature. You often find a number of bones are together because many of these bones were basically scavenged by creatures, and they break the bones and eat the bone marrow. So indeed, it's pretty hard to indeed clarify exactly that indeed the evidence is clear that all these bones belong to one particular creature. It's right. Hard to do that. And of course, the critics of my theory, so to speak, will find that problem and criticize my theory. And of course, I do the same with his theory.
Right. And my understanding is that a lot of times whenever I study these things, and I've seen this also with discoverers of like discoverer of Littlefoot, and discoverers of Lucy, and other types of discoveries. And Naledi, I've been studying Naledi recently. I'm going to ask you about that next, because I know Naledi's been in the news a lot. And you know, I think Netflix dropped a documentary about it and that sort of thing. But anyway, and my observation of this is that a lot of times the original discoverers of these things, the original researchers and things like that, will say something, and then later on, other evolutionists will get hold of it, and they'll say something completely different. Like
Exactly.
they'll claim that Lucy was bipedal, even though the original discoverer said no, that he walked like an ape, and it was a tree dwelling animal and that sort of thing. And then they'll get a hold of this, and they'll try to twist it around from that. Um, uh, uh, the original founder of Littlefoot, for example, said that based on his head, based on Littlefoot's head, looked complete. That it should be classified as a different species from Australopithecus afarensis, Lucy species, because of the differences in the head, and I think they maybe looked at the ears and that sort of thing. But there were a lot of differences there, and so he classified as Prometheus. But yet, the evolutionists claimed that they thought that, or at least several researchers claimed that they thought that Littlefoot should be classified as Africanus because there are similarities in the arms of Littlefoot to Africanus. And then I was reading a article, maybe it's a news broadcast, and someone said that if Clark, that's the discoverer of Littlefoot, was correct, then that would mean that Littlefoot would have to be a chimera. It would have to be, a combination of species, because he has similar areas that look like it should be considered Africanus, while having other areas very distinct from the ones they call Africanus. And so that was kind of a surprising admission coming from someone who's a part of that evolutionary community.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. All we have to do is look at the peer-reviewed literature, and we find very well documented there's problems with all of the supposed missing links.
On Naledi, what would you say? Have you done a lot of study on the plant called Naledi? My understanding is that Naledi has got. I was reading an article this morning about it. Actually, I think it was an article by Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins on ICR's website, and he mentioned that what's being shown here is that there's lots of different fossils involved. Most of it appears to be ape. The head is actually that of an looks like an Australopithecus, what they call Australopith. One of the Australopiths head, because it's it's real small brain size and everything. It just looks like a Australopith head, and so it looks like a chimeric type of reconstruction. It was found in a cave, surrounded by a cave that the original discoverer realized that there's evidence for flooding, that the cave had been flooded in, and a lot of bones were washed in there with the cave flooding, and so you got that problem. And so and of course he also mentions a dating problem, because they dated like some of the bones and I think to teeth as well, and it gave inconsistent dates, of course, as we would expect radiometric dating to do. And then they reject that for the sedimentary date, but it still gave a date way too early for this particular claim of a hominin. And because I think it was like 200 to 300,000 years ago, allegedly. And so there's a problem with the dating as well. So, I mean, can you offer any insights on that, on the lady? I know that that's been on people's mind a lot.
Yeah, there's a problem with dating. There is for most of these fossils, though, a problem with dating. And they have to fit in a scheme. So therefore they, it can't be 50 years old, it can't be 200 years old. It must be a certain number of years old. It can't be 2 billion years old. So therefore they try to, in the timeline, they try to fit it somewhere in that seems to go. And if the dating system they use, potassium argon, whatever, if they use, and of course, usually they don't date the bones, they date the surrounding area. So if that doesn't quite fit, then, well, they keep working until they get the fit together. It's often a bunch of pieces they put together to pick the story up. But my thing they should look at is, indeed, how do you get from an ape to a human? You've got all these supposed missing links, but how do you move from an ape to a human? And of course, we don't have any good fossil evidence that where apes themselves evolved from. So, where did apes evolve from? I've spent some time looking at the evolutionary origin of apes themselves, and there's not much evidence for it. A lot of supposition and guesses, but apes evolved to humans, fine, but how did apes evolve? Where did they evolve from? Were they mouse-like creatures? What were they many, many years before the ape primates evolved?
I heard some people asking evolutionists if we evolved something, then what did we evolve? What were we evolving into?
Yeah.
And sometimes evolutionists try to get around these semantic issues, but they end up getting themselves into a worse case. Originally, they when Charles Darwin first proposed his idea of humans evolving from chimp or apes, they originally said that we evolved from apes, but then they turn around and say, "Oh well, we evolved from an ape-like ancestor. We just, apes and humans just share a common ancestor with something that was both human-like and ape-like." And so what does that mean to be ape-like exactly? It's ape-like, it's an ape, but not an ape. That doesn't make any sense. And then what they would argue is that they are an ape, ultimately. So why don't you just say ape? Because they think we're apes. And then they'll say, well, we're apes too. And I'm like, okay, so let's get this straight. We evolved from apes, but we evolved into apes.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes no sense whatsoever. But they try to come up with all these ways of wording their beliefs to the point where it seems like utter nonsense to me. And so he has this presentation in our interview, and essentially saying, okay, this is fact, this right here is not. This is what they assume. She's arguing, no, we have all of these other finds, but all these other finds aren't what we're seeing here. So Tompkins is still correct, but she's trying to make you think that all Tompkins isn't correct, because look here, we got all these Australopiths, we have all these other fossil finds, and of course we're not denying that these fossil finds exist, but but you have this kind of subject, you will literally have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. Like, okay, are we talking about Lucy? Are we talking about Australopithecus afarensis? Are we talking about Prometheus? Are we talking about Naledi? What are we talking about here? And because each time we're going to be dealing with different issues and different arguments and different counter responses and things like that. But what she's doing is she's elephant hurling a long list. Now, the only thing that's really impressive about this whole thing is that she actually has that much memory to memorize all this stuff. So
I think she had a cue card in front of her. She had a
and she just laid off the list.
She read them all.
Right. But
I couldn't even rattle them off that quick.
Other than that, all she's really doing is elephant hurling it. But if you're really going to deal with a topic like this, deal with specifics. Let's talk about Lucy. Let's talk about Australopithecus afarensis. Let's talk about Australopithecus Prometheus. The only way you can do these kinds of stuff is to deal with those specifics. Simply throwing out a list of fossils that you believe in and they are being reconstructed based on your evolutionary assumptions, that's not going to work. We're going to have to deal with the specifics. So, and that's what she's failing to deal with, at least here. She's failing to deal with the specifics. She's just kind of throwing out a general list as if that automatically disproves Tompkins, but it doesn't. Because one thing, a lot of these Australopiths and a lot of these fossil finds, they're missing a great deal of the fossil, of the actual organism that was fossilized. And so it's like a lot of it is imagination. A lot of it is imagination and evolutionary assumptions. And as one person put it, plaster of Paris.
Yeah.
That's essentially, I think it might have been, I think I heard recently that was C.S. Lewis that said that. Imagination and plaster of Paris.
I think it was the Mark Twain
Mark Twain.
said
Oh,
that.
yeah, Mark Twain. That's right.
Fossil evidence is a few bone fragments and a couple of buckets of plaster Paris.
Was Mark Twain a Christian?
No, but he recognized the fallacies of evolution. Back then, there were a lot of well-known non-Christians who recognized the fallacy of evolution and were pretty open about it.
There are quite a few guys in that list that I just said that span this sort of in-between section here. That I don't think our pal Jeff here is gonna touch on. But
Of course, we would say no. They don't span that individual or in between state. Hey, she's essentially presenting this list as transitional fossils because that's what the in between would be, the in between states, which is transitional fossils. Would you say that these are not transitional at all? Because transitional are in between states. Like if you can taxonomically identify something as ape, chimp, human, or whatever the case may be, even if it's a mixture of fossils, you would sit there and say that this would not be a transitional form at all.
Right, right. Most were not in any way, shape, or form transitional. What they weren't was either pretty clearly apes or modern humans, or at least Neanderthals, which of course are now we recognize as modern humans. And so therefore, the claim that they're transitional forms is just not true. They're,
Right.
of course, arguing about that. The evolutionists themselves are arguing about whether they are transitional. But again, I think my example is a good transition. You think yours is a good transitional. And you criticize mine effectively, I criticize yours effectively, but I still believe in mine because, well, I believe in evolution. So there has to be some transitional forms.
Right. And so they would try to argue for them as being transitional, but they're not really transitional. It'd be kind of like finding the fossil remains of a duck-billed platypus and assuming that that's a transitional between a duck and a mammal. But in reality, it's not. In fact, even evolutionists don't think they evolved from a duck. They just have similarities with other animals.
Right.
So we would not consider that a transitional. A transitional, by definition, has to be an in-between state. And finding a few fossil fragments and then filling in the blanks with your imagination would not be a transitional fossil at all. It has to be an actual form that fits the description that they're claiming as far as that goes.
Right.
All right.
But I do know this is going to touch on one of them. It's Lucy. Surprise.
These humans and apes. So let's start with Lucy. So commonly known as Australopithecus afarensis, skeleton was only about 40% complete. That's all they had of it, and it was discovered in 1974.
Okay, 40% complete, like of a full skeleton. Lucy is bilaterally symmetric. So like there's going to be a lot of that 40% that overlaps down the midline. Now, if they were completely, like hypothetically, two completely different, like a unique 40% that doesn't look like you might get, I don't know, like a massive like 80% of the skeleton. But it also depends on how you're comparing, like how you're talking about the skeleton. Are you doing it by bones? Like I don't think you need every rib to get a decent idea of what the animal looks like. Or are you doing it by mass? In which case I think it's going to be significantly larger than 80% even, because if you look at how much of the skeleton is there, a lot of the bulk of the skeleton is going to come from like the pelvis, the vertebral column, the skull. Primarily the skull is missing in loose specimen. You've got that right humerus, you've got a lot of the left humerus, you've got a lot of the right and left forearms. Also, you're missing a lot of the hands and feet, you're missing the left femur, you're missing most of the fibula, the shaft, the tibia, but you got quite a lot going on here. Let's let.
All right. I know that you've talked about the numbers, and this is something I was wanting to ask you as well, as far as that goes. You said that I think it was at like 22%, and because it's like 400, what was it like 400 and something, or how much percent of it was actually discovered? How do they count the amount of fossil that they have?
Yeah, 40% is what if they get part of a femur, they got a femur. So that's how, now that's their numbers. Their number is 40% complete. You by weight, closer to 20% complete by weight. Because you have a lot of bone fragments. And the problem is you don't have a lot of the important bones you need, like the hand bones, the foot bones, the pelvis bones. And so you have a lot of bones, but well, the skull is the most important part, of course. It's less complete than any other part of the body. You can see the skull up there is just part of the jaw and some skull top fragments. And then there's the argument, indeed, are these all part of the same creature? Which many have concluded they are, but some feel that no, they're not. And so, and of course, what can you tell by the skeleton? You can tell a lot, but a lot you can't tell. And therefore, seems to me to be pretty much just it's an ape.
Right.
There's not really much evidence that it's a missing link between us and some primitive ape.
I think she's trying to get more of the fossil there. And so she says, well, are you doing it by mass or what? How do you think she's getting the 80%?
Well, what she does is she says if we have a femur, we've got basically both femurs because the other's the mirror image. So we got a femur, we got both femurs. So when you count that, when you count the other side, you could probably get up to 80, but even that I don't think is probably correct. Maybe 60, because you have a lot of parts that you don't have. You don't have a mate, like the hands, the feet, and you've got part of the sacrum and this hip area, but you don't have a lot of the critical parts. And again,
if you take away the parts, they're likely not part of the original. I believe they have a little fossil up here. What was it, baboon that it had of a fossil. It was like a part. Evolutionists actually recognize it too, to this day. It's located like right here at the top, I think. And that's not part of the original. This right here looks like a human sanctum, so it's probably a lot of people have said this about Lucy, that it's probably a chimera, that it's a combination of other fossil bones and sections. And this right here could be human. I don't know. Is this human or not human, do you think?
Well, it looks from here, it's human, but then again, we have to do more evaluation of the bone,
Right.
femur. And so that's not being done. But there's a lot of debate about Lucy among even evolutionists have a lot of questions about whether Lucy is a valid missing link. I think it's pretty clear she's just another ape.
Right. As far as the parts that are clearly ape.
Right.
And not
most are clearly ape. Some are more ambiguous, but most are clearly ape. And then some are ambiguous.
And then this right here from a different ape. Yeah. Bamboo. How did the bamboo fossil get tied in there? Is it just because the fossils are spread around?
I don't know the area. You hear different reports, but I understand several hundred feet apart they were, and therefore you had quite an area that you had to look. Evidently, this was a body of a chimp, and it was scavenged by scavenger animals, various animals, and that's how the parts were spread around. And I know they would, some true believers in evolution would probably disagree with that, but it appears to me that's basically what we found. We found an ape that was died, scavenged, and these parts were scattered around, and some parts were found.
Do you agree with what she said about how much is there is going to be depending on how you look at it?
Well, I can see she may get 60%, but on the other hand, 40% is what the evolutionists say. And that may be a stretch, but on the other hand, yeah, you could say about 40% when you consider that you find one bone on one side and the other bone on the other side is going to be its mate, so you can figure out what that's going to be like. So, yeah, you can probably get 40%, but indeed what we actually have is closer to 20-25% by weight.
Right.
There's a lot of bones we don't have.
Right. All right, let's continue.
That doesn't tell us why it's bad, though.
They dated Lucy at about 3 million years old and claiming that she was bipedal and walked upright. However, we've got major problems with this, admitted by the evolutionists themselves, that Lucy really walked upright. So Eric Stockstad, an evolutionist, published this article in Science in 2000, and he said, I walked over to the cabinet, pulled out Lucy, and Shazam. She had the morphology that was classic for knuckle. So in other words,
okay, well, you know what? Let's let him finish.
But Lucy wasn't swinging around in trees, and she was on the ground, walking around on all fours like chimpanzees do, because they're designed to be knuckle walkers. They have special walking wrists that humans don't have, so they can walk around and do that. There's a picture of a chimp doing what chimps do, knuckle walking on the ground.
Okay, so Stockstad and also Brian Richmond are two of our big guys who were these knuckle walking proponents for Australopithecus afarensis back in the early 2000s, so 2000, 2001, etc. I believe Straight was also involved on this, and they do it based off of some particular notching that's going on in like the carpals and the distal end of the radius. This has not stood the test of time because a lot of the knuckle walkers that they assessed in their study, and this was noted by I think it was Lovejoy and colleagues later on, a lot of the specimens that are known for knuckle walking are actually like missing the notch, right? And a lot of the organisms that some of the organisms, I believe, some of the organisms that are not knuckle walkers had partial notches. So it doesn't do a good job. The primary characteristic that Brian Richmond and that Stockstad and that Straight were relying on to distinguish knuckle walkers from non-knuckle walkers is not actually a diagnostic characteristic in the carpals. And I also know this because one of my colleagues actually works on hands. She studies hominoid hands. So the hands of extant gibbons, ape, like all of the great apes, so like Congo, gorilla, canids, and humans. And she actually published, like she's published on the material of like Monoleti. She does this, she pretty much knows hands like very well. Chimpanzees and gorillas knuckle walk in different ways. So that absolutely wrecks this idea of a knuckle walking ancestor for the sake of parsimony. They've actually evolved knuckle walking uniquely because the mechanism is actually separate. And that would also explain why the singular notch isn't very good at distinguishing and discriminating knuckle walkers from non-knuckle walkers. But more importantly,
All right, well, let's just deal with what she said already. She said a lot there. But essentially, Tompkins used a paper where he quotes from Stockstad, hominid ancestors may have knuckle walked in Science, 2000. And the quote is, I walked over to the cabinet, pulled out Lucy, and Shazam, she had the morphology that was classically knuckle walkers. I took the liberty of actually reading the paper. He does actually say that that he thinks that the knuckle walking aspect of Lucy was somehow or evolved or how do you put it? He thinks that they retain their knuckle walking parts to it. I'm trying to think back to, it's been a while since I looked at the paper, but obviously the paper does assume evolutionary assumptions and that sort of thing, which we would expect. But the person does admit that the wrists and stuff like that was designed for knuckle walking, and I think this was I'm thinking it's a comparison of other Australopithecus afarensis, because Lucy's hands are actually missing from the fossil find. Right. So I'm thinking it's a contrast to other Australopithecus. Now she's saying that these would evolve differently as separate parts, and therefore that this would not necessarily mean that she was a knuckle walker. What would you say to that? Do you think that Stockstad makes a good point if you know, because the way the way that primates hands, they lock like that when they're walking on knuckles. Ours is not really made to walk on our knuckles. If we walk on our knuckles for so long, it'll start hurting. But they're obviously, they got the longer phalanges. They've got the specialized wrist that's just designed specifically to walk on their knuckles, the longer arms and that sort of thing. And so do you think she makes a valid point, or do you think the point doesn't stand?
Well, there are, of course, differences in the fingers, and knuckle walk fingers are, but as you said, with Lucy, we don't have any fingers. And so you just have to assume we find some other Australopithecus afarensis And we have to assume that bones we found, finger bones we found there were the same ones on Lucy. So a lot of assumptions there. And I think if you look at that's one factor you have to look at. Problem that she has is she's surrounded by people who are thoroughly imbued in the evolutionary paradigm. Therefore, all she's going to get is the information that supports the evolutionary paradigm. She's not going to be exposed to, by and large, information that doesn't support that. And therefore, that's her worldview. She's going to accept evolution because she's not aware of the other worldview.
You think there's a bit of a confirmation bias that might be involved here?
I think so, yeah. I'm not familiar with Stolstad's work, but I think I'm aware of that quote that you mentioned that. Yeah, he may have been, but there's a lot of debate about Lucy herself, whether or not it was a she. Some people think she was a he. So there's a lot of debate even about that. What I would look at is how do we get from Lucy to modern humans? You get there by mutations. Mutations doesn't work because we know the vast majority are negative or near neutral, and therefore we cannot evolve life by the accumulation of mutations when we know the vast majority are near neutral or are negative. Therefore, we have no mechanism to get from amoeba to humans, period. Darwin didn't, and he realized that he didn't, and we still don't today. We don't have any means of getting from one creature to another different creature. So therefore, the whole evolutionary scenario has got to be wrong because we don't have a mechanism to go from the primitive ape to modern man.
Yeah, mutations also don't. I'm sorry.
It can't be. So therefore, this evolution progression has to be wrong. It cannot be right. We have to come up with a mechanism that will bring us to the next stage.
Also, mutations don't add new information either. So that's a problem.
Right. I worked in medical school, we worked with mutations. Mutations cause cancer. So I know a lot about mutations. We know a lot about mutations. We know that you're not going to get from ape to human by mutations. Not going to happen. And we know a huge amount about mutations. Very important because mutations is a major cause of disease, not only cancer, but also other diseases. So we know a lot about that, and there's no way we're going to use mutations to evolve humans.
Right.
Then all of this is that Lucy's entire morphology is that of a biped and could not be that of a quadruped, period. Biomechanically, it does not work. The foramen magnum is anterior and the position is forward.
Did you hear that, Dr. Bergman?
Yeah. So of course I disagree with her, but on the other hand, so we have a ape that walks bipedal. I mean, some do walk bipedally occasionally. Maybe we have an ape that walk bipedally all the time. Isn't that neat? Isn't that incredible? It's still in no way disprove evolution.
The interesting thing is that the frame of Magnum was actually not actually with Lucy, and most of the Lucy skull is missing. So where is she getting the internal frame of Magnum from? It's not from the Lucy fossil because it's not present, and there's not enough of the skull to be able to make that determination. So
is she referring to Lucy?
Yeah, she's referring to Lucy.
Oh, okay. Well, I would expect her to know more than that. I mean, that's pretty obvious that it didn't have a foramen magnum.
Is there any other Australopithecus that has this is something I was wondering about, because sometimes she tries to say that she can compare, like if she thinks that Australopithecus afarensis is a particular species of Australopith, and so she just takes another Australopith that's also afarensis and compare it, and even though Lucy might be missing these parts, that she can contrast it with these other afarensis. And so because she has this type of view on the way she determines things, I was curious, is there any other Australopithecus that has, because I remember your talk in our last interview of the different images for the frame of magnum between primates and humans, and the differences there, you know, where there's this kind of like in the back of the head, and humans is kind of like, you know, straight up, you know, up into the skull. And are there any other Australopithecus? For example, Prometheus. I think the head of Prometheus was very complete. Is the prima magna in the back, or like us?
And I haven't done a survey recently, but among all of those I know, there's no evidence that the foramen magnum is where it is in humans. It's toward the occipital area of the skull and not toward the lower, below the occipital area.
So this is just based on, I guess it sounds good to claim that, because if you've never actually looked at the fossil, or if you never actually study the subject matter, or if you don't even know what a foramen magnum is, it'd be easy to make a blank assertion like this. That it's like, okay, where's the evidence that what you're saying on foramen magnum being internal to Lucy and that sort of thing? Where's the evidence for this?
Yeah. Problem is she has thousands of viewers, and of course, whatever she says, they tend to accept. And so
Right.
she can convince a lot of people toward her worldview, even though there's major problems with her worldview. And be nice, I guess, if we could space, if you did a video with her and then pretty much everything she covered, you could respond to that or have somebody respond to that.
Yeah.
But then again, how many people would look at it? I find when I go out and speak to evolutionists, they're not interested in reading what I have to say. You're a creationist, therefore, I'm not going to bother reading what you have to say. My book, Apes as Ancestors, my experience so far is they're not interested because you must be wrong, because evolution is true. Therefore, why should I spend my time reading your book, because it may sound good, but it must be wrong.
Right. All
That's
right.
the response that I get.
Let's move forward.
That's what you need for the foramen magnum to actually to characterize a biped to the exclusion of other types of locomotion within primates. She's a bowl-shaped pelvis with sagittally oriented iliac blades.
You hear this, Dr. Bergman? She's
Bullshit.
claiming that Lucy, let me back that up.
Foramen magnum to actually to characterize a biped to the exclusion of other types of locomotion within primates. She's a bowl-shaped pelvis with sagittally oriented iliac blades, and it has an anterior inferior iliac spine.
All right. She's claiming that the pelvis was bowl shaped. Now we already saw that the pelvis was not complete, for one thing. And secondly, was that what she said about the iliac spine?
Well, it's hard. Do they have the bones that shows that one way or the other? And
I don't think
again,
so.
she may be saying, well, we have other Australopithecines, and therefore we're taking their construction and implying that Lucy must have had the same construction. I think that's what she's doing.
Yeah, I think so too, because there's nothing in the Lucy fossil that would indicate they had a bowl-shaped pelvis. The iliac blade looks a little bit more like that of a chimp, if you actually compare it.
Yeah.
And or ape. And the spine, there's like bits and pieces of the spine. So there's a lot missing from the spine. So I'm not exactly sure why she thinks that the spine is aligned too, but she does have a habit of looking at others she thinks are the same species as Lucy, and then making inferences from that, assuming Lucy must have had the same thing,
Right.
essentially.
does.
But of course, that also assumes that those are not chimeric species, and the classification is completely artificial and that sort of thing. So you'd have to evaluate those individuals as well on top of that, because they could be a combination of other species.
Yep.
Which is a critical muscle attachment site for maintaining stability, being upright, and it strengthens the pelvic floor, the bowl shape of the pelvis, not the spine, not the inferior iliac spine. I mean, she had a valgus knee, the carrying angle that allows you to pose her weight in singular column. She had the.
All right. We talked about that knee in the previous interview. You mentioned that there are similarities between chimps and humans, or apes and human knees, because it protects that particular area. And also the femur was actually found some distance away from Lucy. You said that even earlier that it was found over a certain area, as far as that. And so there's the possibility that other fossils could have been mixed in with it. But the kneecap, they're talking about that little slant right there. And they assume that that means that this is a transitional feature of Lucy walking upright.
Yeah, a lot of assumptions there. But of course,
Yeah.
even among the paleontological community, there's a lot of disagreement about what Lucy was. So, it's not just us, but it's professionals who study this, spent their life studying this. They find a lot of problems with the Lucy claims.
Right.
Including whether she was a female. You can't tell it was a male or female. That's kind of the first step in trying to figure out what she was about. If you can't tell that for sure, then you have a problem.
Right.
Valgus knee, the carrying angle that allows you to hold your weight in a singular column. She had the inline big toe and
Inline big toe.
Yeah. Well,
did Lucy have any feet, Dr. Bergman?
Yeah, she again must be comparing findings in other Australopithecines with Lucy.
There's only very few Australopithecines that have the foot. I know that there's two that I know of specifically. One is titled the Dakika child, is what they call the Dakika child, which is supposed to be the same species as Lucy, Afarensis. And my understanding, and some people call it Lucy's child, although everybody knows it's not Lucy's child. But essentially, my understanding is that foot was found some distance away and embedded in a rock, but because it was a child's foot, and I guess it's kind of like a baby chimpanzee,
Yeah.
the Kika child. So they think that the foot was part of the same specimen. Do you know anything about that on the Dakika child?
Yeah, from what you mentioned, I recall studying that. Yeah. The
Yeah.
expert really on this is Peter Line. You need to get Peter Line on here. Now, he lives in Australia, but he has, I think, a PhD in anatomy physiology. He traveled around the world getting photographs of these different fossils. So he's by far more, far. He's clearly the expert. So
yeah, I need to put a note on that one. I would love to have him on here and maybe discussing the lady too, because I thought about having a full blown video on that since the lady's been in conversation lately. But I would love to have Peter Line on here. Does he have a email address and stuff? Does he have like a website or something?
I think you can get him. I probably have his email somewhere, but he doesn't have a website as far as I know. You could probably contact him through
Does he work for a
CMI? He doesn't work for CMI, but he does a lot of work for them. He does a lot of writing for them.
Yeah. On the second one was one that we already discussed in our previous interview concerning Prometheus, Littlefoot. And there's a thing about the foot being inline. And y'all actually, see, I didn't have at the time that we did our interview, I didn't have your book here. Now that I got the book, I actually read what y'all wrote on that. Y'all said that the original researchers identified that the toe was in accordance to the way apes were with divergent. I think you mentioned in our previous interview that the apes feet is really just another set of hands. And so if you look at our hands right here, I'm trying to show my hands on the screen. I've got a thumb here, and that thumb is divergent from the four fingers that I have. It's designed so I can grab hold of something like this. But if you look at our feet is not designed that way. Our feet is designed where everything's like in line, where it's not, where the big toe isn't divergent like that, where it's moved away from the rest of the toes. And so she's claiming that Lucy had a inline big toe, which is false because Lucy didn't have any feet. Or maybe is she talking about Prometheus there?
I think
she's talking about Lucy right here,
fine.
isn't she? She's talking about Lucy still, isn't she?
Lucy Kind is what I think she's, although I don't know
Yeah.
what she's doing now.
But the only one that I know of that had the foot with the Australopithecus afarensis was the Kika Chow, wasn't it?
As far as I recall, yeah. Those are
So,
details I don't always retain very well.
so she has to be getting that idea of an inline big toe from the Kika Chow, because that's the only thing she could be basing that off of.
Yeah.
Because Lucy had no feet with it, and I don't know of any other Australopithecus afarensis that had feet with it. Even if you rejected the Prometheus classification by Clark, the only other classification that they were classifying it as is Africanus, which would be a different species from afarensis. So the only thing I can think of is that she's basing that on the Dakika child. She doesn't say, of course, but that's the only thing I can think of.
Which she should, yeah. She should make it clear where she gets her comparisons from.
Yeah, because the implication is that she's comparing it to the fossil that we have of Lucy, which obviously she isn't, because if she did, then the foot is not even in the fossils.
Right.
So it's kind of misleading to sit there and say Lucy had this, Lucy had that, when the Lucy fossil didn't have that at all.
Right.
Let's continue.
The three arches in the foot. And what
Another thing is that Lucy didn't have an arched foot. I realized I missed that this time around going through. I caught it last time when I originally went through it. She said Lucy had an arched foot. Lucy had no feet. Lucy had no feet. So therefore, how will she know what shape, position her feet is? She said, well, we have other Australopithecus afarensis, yes, but for the most part, with the exception of maybe the Kika child, their feet are missing. So yeah, and Littlefoot wouldn't even be classified as afarensis anyhow. So you couldn't use Littlefoot, but you can try to use the Kika child. But the foot was found away from the fossil, found some distance away, embedded in a rock, and so there's questions about whether it's actually even part of the fossil find to begin with. But either way, she's trying to infer back into that, as Dr. Bergman clearly pointed out. She could also be getting the arch foot from Laetoli footprints, but I think we'll be speaking about that here shortly.
Tompkins is going to go on here, so you can be like, oh, we didn't find any hands and feet with Lucy, and the Laetoli footprints are far away from Lucy, so arguing that Lucy's kind made these footprints is ridiculous. No, it is not, because we have Australopiths that are dated to the time period of the Laetoli footprints, and Australopiths are the only thing living at that time that has the foot morphology that matches that we see at the Laetoli footprints.
All right, this looks like a circular argument. She's arguing that Australopithecus was around the same time, and Australopithecus had that foot arrangement. Therefore, Australopithecus must have made the Laetoli footprints, and the Laetoli footprints proved that their feet design must be, it seems like she's arguing in a circle here.
Yeah, the Laetoli footprints look very human. Of course, I guess she's arguing that therefore they're what, 500 miles from actually where Lucy bones were found. So
yeah, what she's basically arguing is that because the Lucy find is and other Australopithecus are dated around the same time as the Laetoli footprints, therefore they must have made the footprints, because humans, after all, couldn't have lived at that time. That's what she's assuming, but she's assuming her position to try to prove her position, which is circular. So. Right. Plus, as I think you mentioned, and I've heard others have mentioned as well, the only thing you can really date with it is the ash. You can't date the actual prints themselves. So how do you know if the prints weren't made well after the ash? This is volcanic ash, right?
Yeah.
After the volcanic ash was there. And so, because all you can really date is the ash itself. And that's if you assume the reliability of radiometric dating to begin with, which obviously she does.
Some assume the footprints were made 50 years ago. Local people, they claim the footprints were made not too long ago.
Right.
Which could be. I mean, you don't know.
Right. It just looks like somebody just walking barefooted on the ash.
Right.
A condition that is intermediate to how chimpanzees walk bipedally and how anatomically modern hunter-gatherers.
Well, the footprint's intermediate. Again, intermediate literally means in between state. That means it's not human, it's not chimp. It might be chimp-like or human-like, but it would be in between those two taxonomy. Is the Laetoli footprints transitional, intermediate? But I think, as you put it, it looks entirely human, so it can't be transitional.
Right. From people who've examined them, they look totally human.
Unshod walk bipedally. Now, then he complains about the nature of the recreation for Lucy. We could corroborate that with other Australopiths that they will never bring up. They're not going to talk about Australopithecus sediba and how we have the entire half of the pelvis for Australopithecus sediba that corroborates the reconstruction of Lucy. They're not going to talk about.
All right, Australopithecus sediba, the hip structure. Is that I think she's claiming that the hip structure matches that of other Australopiths, claiming that she must have walked bipedally. Is that true? Is that how much of the hip structure do we have on sediba?
Not enough, I think, to firmly determine whether or not she was bipedal or not. So Erika's putting a lot of stuff together, and she's trying to make a picture by showing something here, something there, something somewhere else, putting it all together. And that's, of course, takes a lot of supposition, a lot of assumptions. And she sees the world through evolutionary glasses, so she sees something which is not really fully there.
About STW 573, which we have like almost 100% of that skeleton, including the foot that shows it has an inline big toe.
All right, let's see what she said.
Where's the reconstruction of Lucy? They're not going to talk about STW 573, which we have like almost 100% of that skeleton, including the foot that shows it.
CW 573, I think, is Prometheus. It's the one that's classified as Littlefoot. All right, but that's not correct at all. It doesn't have an inline big toe. Its toe was actually divergent. At best, some people claim that it's transitional or intermediate, like it almost looks divergent, and then other people say it's completely divergent. Of course, it's hard to tell from a fossil because a fossil can't move. So, as far as the toe goes, research that's done in that, the original discoverer of Prometheus by Clark said that it was clearly ape. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, if I recall correctly, yeah.
Yeah. So her claim that it's an inline big toe is just simply false. But of course, she comes off all confident, comes off all assurance and assured that this is true, that it becomes very convincing to somebody that doesn't know the facts on that.
That's true. I wonder if she's read my book, Apes as Ancestors.
I don't know, honestly.
I want to ask her if she's read it. I doubt if she has. I doubt if she will. She'll probably say, well, this is written by a bunch of creationists, and it's written by Jeffrey Tompkins, so I'm not going to read it because I don't think much of him. So she'll probably. Right. I had a friend of mine at the college who did an article on the evolution of snakes, and he was doing his PhD on snakes. And so I thought, I'll give him my article and maybe he can critique it. After all, he's an expert in this area. I'm not. I just looked up the literature relative to the evolution of snakes, and he wouldn't read it. He says, why should I read it? You're wrong. Snakes evolve. End of story. But if you read it, you can see I've mustered the evidence that there's no evidence for snake evolution. It says, you're wrong. They evolve. So why should I bother reading your paper? but you might find some things that you could critique. You may find I'm wrong in some areas. It's just, I'm not interested. I don't want to waste my time reading your paper. So he didn't. He wouldn't read it. And I thought it was a pretty convincing evidence from the literature that indeed we have no clear evidence of evolution of snakes. The first snake was, as far as we can tell, a snake.
A lot of times I found that as well. They evolutionists tend to not read what we write on things. They tend to misunderstand arguments. I was sitting there debating with an atheist evolutionist the other day, actually, I think, and he brought talked. We were talking about C14 in diamonds, and as he's asked me, well, what's the talking about the rate study and the means? I said, well, they counted these C14 atoms, and he said, oh, that's not how it's done. And I said, oh no, you're misunderstanding the argument. They're not trying to carbon date diamonds. Whether it's the fact that diamonds or carbon-14 half-life is 5,730 years, and so after 90,000 years, it should be no measurable amounts. And you got plenty of abundance of carbon-14 and things that's supposed to be anywhere from millions to billions of years old. And so that's a problem because there should be no carbon-14 in there, or at least none measurable. I think that they wouldn't argue that necessarily that it would go to zero, but it should be no measurable amounts of carbon-14 in there. And that's the whole point of the argument. So the point of the argument isn't C14 dating. So it's kind of easy to misunderstand. There's a lot of evolutionists that don't know that we have peer review material. I was sitting there talking to somebody about the other day. He said, well, creationists have papers that they allow other people to review it. I said, well, yes. Yes, they do.
Yeah, we do.
So yeah, this is a constant problem with evolutionists. They don't like reading what we write. They don't understand a lot of the arguments that we make. And in many cases, they don't even want to try to understand it.
Ignoring big toe and suggest the three arches in the foot as well. They're not going to talk about the Dakika. They're going to skip all of this because they can't deal with it.
Dr. Bergman, didn't we just got through talking about it?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't want to talk about any of these things, but we do. Tompkins talked about it. Like you said, has she even read this book yet? We did talk about it.
They can't actually fit it into their model because it patently denies quadrupedalism for these hominids.
I disagree with that. I think once you look at the evidence, even if you looked at the evidence from an evolutionary standpoint, it seems to support that these were quadrupedic creatures. Now, of course, even if an ape was bipedal, this wouldn't prove evolution. It just, like you said, it'd just be a bipedal ape. So even if you could prove that, but I find it very hard to believe, given the scant evidence of the fossil evidence, as well as the problems of mixture of bones and so forth, how you could be able to prove that from the fossil evidence. It doesn't seem likely. Okay.
And without bearing on the origin and earliest of Homo is usually thought of as a momentous transformation of the fossil record. Bearing on the origin and earliest evolution of the Homo is virtually undocumented. And that was in the Royal Society 2016, and nothing has changed since then.
But I think she does say that undocumented. They say it's undocumented because it's slow or something like that. But the point is that Tompkins is making here is that it's not something that we observe. And by definition, Darwinian evolution would be something beyond what we're actually able to observe. We don't observe evolution actually happening. Not Darwinian evolution. Now we could talk about variations within a kind and things like that, which is more variations and adaptations and things like that. But that's different from Darwinian evolution of all life being related, humans being related to plants and things like that.
Yeah.
All right, she's fixing to talk about Neanderthals. I want to get into this real quick.
But what about this whole idea of Neanderthals and so-called primitive archaic traits in humans? The fact of the matter is, you wouldn't even know a Neanderthal. He came up to you with a name tag and a spear on the street because they looked human. And in fact, now they're sequencing DNA, human DNA. They're sequencing DNA from Neanderthals. They have been actually ritually buried in caves because they're human. And so we see stories like this in the news quite frequently now. Humans
That's going to be a really tough sell for Jeff when these big announcements that are supposed to come out tomorrow by Lee Berger and company that I have a very strong feeling are going to involve the ritualistic burial of the dead at the Homendeleti site, a hominin with a brain case the size of an ostrich.
Actually, I read something about what Tompkins actually read on the article. Um, Hello. I was editing this and I decided to say a few things on Naledi. Um, I was just reading an article just a few minutes ago on Naledi by Tim Clary, who's a geologist. He works for Institute for Creation Research, and he was talking about dispute over Naledi, and he referenced the fact that the evidence seems to show that they did not bury their dead. That the claim that they did is highly disputed. I mean, just even disputed by the evolutionists. So, as near as I can tell, the Naledi looks like an Australopith. The skull is similar to an Australopith, and similar in size, according to the original researchers. According to Peter Line, who also had a skull of the Naledi, it's actually a little bit bigger than a typical Australopith, but probably maybe close to similar, maybe somewhat. But most of it, according to the original researchers, most of it was similar to an Australopith. They try to claim some similarities to humans, like in the hands or something, but that could be due to a mixture of bones. You got to keep in mind these bones were all found in a cave together, and so and there's some evidence that suggests that they were washed in there, and during the Ice Age and things like that, and so they could be a mixture of bones, even if the corpses were um, uh, uh, washed in. People that are finding these fossils could reconstruct it incorrectly, and so that will still cause a mixture of bones, and so there's some bones that could have gotten mixed in there. So I wouldn't put too much on the fossil evidence per se with Naledi, other than maybe the skulls, which is probably the strongest evidence of similarity to Australopith. But I would not put too much stock in that. Now, as far as them burying the dead, from what I understand, that is disputed, and there is evidence contrary to it. I'm trying to see if I can get. I'm going to contact. I think I'm going to contact Institute for Creation Research tomorrow, and try to see if I can get. See if I can get Dr. Tim Clary to come on the Genesis series to talk to me about that. I would love to have him on here to discuss Naledi and find out what he knows on that, as far as whether Naledi was ape or human. But as near as I can tell, it was an ape, probably an Australopith, possibly, if not a chimeric species, which is possible. It's chimeric, and maybe the head or the skull is similar to an Australopith or something of that nature. It's possible, given the fact that it was found a bunch of bones in a cave, and there's evidence of it, the bones being washed in there and things like that during the Ice Age. So I think that it is possible to be chimeric. I'm not 100% sure one way or the other, but I am sure that it's not human. That I think there's evidence against the idea that they buried the dead. I don't think that the evidence that favored them favoring ritualistic burial is very strong. And as near as I know, the original researchers claimed it, but I think that others afterwards did dispute that. So it is disputed at the moment. But in any case, I just thought I'd throw that in there about Naledi, because she seems so happy about the idea. Well, wait until the original researchers get a hold of this and look at what they say, and as if I'm going to actually believe them. so wow. But it's like give it a few days, and sure enough, people started disputing it. But as far as I know, one, I understand at least that the evidence is not very strong for them to have ritualistic burial. So just because the original researchers thought that doesn't mean that it's true. I mean, it's not even universally thought. so I mean, so I just wanted to throw that in there. I think that they are an apish primate, possibly an Australopith, but it's hard to tell because they could also be possibly chimeric because it's like I said, it's found in a cave, bunch of bones found together, and from what I understand, there's evidence of it being washed in there during the Ice Age, and it's hard to say, and so more than likely, I think some of the bones they get mixed up, and that would explain why there's a little bit of human features, but it's not really part of the skeleton. It's probably just being reconstructed that way. So it's going to be highly interpretive, very subjective, subjective to presuppositions on how you think these things looked. Um, uh, Also, the interpretation could be incorrect because the skull, even though it's similar to Australopith, is a little bit bigger than Australopith. The evidence of ritualistic burial is extremely weak. So I would be careful and tread with a lot of caution upon interpreting the fossil evidence for Naledi. As far as I know, I wouldn't put too much stock in it. She seems to be wanting to put a lot more stock in it than I'd be willing to given the circumstances. Let me see if I can bring that up real quick.
I don't understand all of what she's saying. She's talking too fast, and
Yeah, she's kind of going really fast, but she's saying that okay, Tompkins mentioned about the burial of the dead. This gets brought up a lot that this is an expression of the humanity of Neanderthals, because they buried their dead. Well, some people were arguing that that there was evidence of Naledi burying their dead, but yet their head was obviously the size of Australopithecus, Afransis or Australopithecus, Ocelot, with the brain size and everything else of Naledi. And so because Tompkins is arguing for Neanderthals being human because of the burial, and she's saying, well, that's that the Naledi had buried their dead. Now, from what I understand from Tompkins's argument or Tompkins's article, because he actually writes an article on this, it's on CMI's website, and in that article, he mentioned that the evidence actually points against them burying their dead. That's what I was fixing to go to because I'm not sure. I know he presents the evidence in the article, but I can't remember what he actually said on that. I was reading it early today, but I know that from what I understand, the evidence is actually that Naledi did not actually bury their dead. That was something that they thought that they had evidence for, turned out not to be the case. Do you want me to go to that article, or do you want me to just continue?
no, that's all right. I can mention that there's a lot of evidence that Neanderthal was fully human, not just burying their dead, but making musical instruments, the artwork they did. There are many, many. So it's not one set of audiences of articles that demonstrate this.
Right. It's weird that she brings this up because it almost sounds like she's denying the humanity of Neanderthals, but just like other evolutionists, she acknowledges that Neanderthals are human. Now, she would probably say that there are different species of human, and we would argue, no, they're the same species as us. They're just a different variation of human. They're another people group, as you put it, in our previous interview. But she would argue that she thinks is a species, but they all agree, as far as I can tell, we all agree that Neanderthals were human. So I don't know why she's bringing this up right now. It doesn't make any sense because even with her own beliefs, she does believe Neanderthals are human. She thinks they're a different species from us, but she does think that they're human.
But for a century, they were one of the main evidences of human evolution for a century. Commonly in textbooks, you have Neanderthals right there in the lineage going up to modern man. And so this, now they've got egg on their face because indeed they pushed for a century. They pushed this idea, this is the best evidence we have for human evolution. There we go. And of course, now that has been shown to be wrong. And so it's clearly embarrassing for evolutionists. They say, well, we were wrong, but we'll keep pushing ahead.
Right.
It's like burying your dead makes you human. AIG is gonna have to do a 180 on Mileti real quickly.
Right.
So what do you think about that? Of course, I don't think there's any good evidence of Mileti burying the dead. And the funny thing is that a lot of times what happens is that as soon as a report comes out, more research is done, and then all of a sudden they're starting to revise their story. And so that's the interesting part about a lot of these claims, is that they often get retracted.
Yeah. Well, they conclude Neanderthals bury their dead because you find flowers, you find evidences of burial. Where among the other groups that they find a body buried, but could be buried for many reasons.
Right.
Once the study shows your Neanderthal DNA might actually be doing you some good. So yes, there are evolutionists out there saying we need to clone Neanderthal brain genes and put them in our own genome because Neanderthals had bigger brains.
Name one.
So that doesn't sound like
Okay, let's back that up real quick.
doing you some good. So yes, there are evolutionists out there saying we need to clone Neanderthal brain genes and put them in our own genome because Neanderthals had bigger brains.
Name one.
Okay, well, technically he did name one. He just quoted the article. Your Neanderthal DNA might actually be doing you some good. That was in an article that that was written. I wish he had put the author's name of it. I would love to check that out. But he said name one. I don't understand. Is she saying no Neanderthal DNA isn't doing us any good?
I don't know. She's just being cantankerous, I think.
It doesn't make any sense because I actually heard her in a discussion recently in Standing for Truth, where Standing for Truth does a lot of open mics. I know that you've been on Standing for Truth before, but they've been doing open mics where they challenge evolutionists, and evolutionists will come on there and have discussions with creationists and so forth. And in Standing for Truth, I know that she was on there, and she actually admitted that Neanderthals were smarter than modern humans, and they had bigger brain sizes and so forth. And she admitted all this. So I'm just kind of confused. Why doesn't she think the Neanderthal DNA in us would not be doing good? Exactly. I don't understand what her issue is there.
I don't either. So we can go on and see what else she has to say.
Like evolutionary thinking to me.
We didn't descend from Neanderthals, Jeff. They're a cousin.
All right. How do they view Neanderthals exactly? As far as the evolutionists goes,
They're cousins, yeah. They're an offshoot.
They're an offshoot.
Yeah.
But they do claim that both Neanderthals and humans, or modern humans, came from a common ancestor too, right?
Right. Although for a century we did descend from Neanderthals, and it was accepted. But now we're just common ancestor.
Seems like they changed their story to fit changed their narrative to fit the evidence more and more. Because as the evidence is coming in, it's like, well, we were wrong. So we better change our story and make it look like that's the song we've always been singing.
Humans may have been mothers to some Neanderthals earlier than we thought. So this is the general consensus that humans and Neanderthals interbred, and essentially Neanderthals, or the evolutionists, were archaic humans.
Wrong. Absolutely 100% wrong. They're considered a distinct species on the basis of morphology and on the basis of their genome, which falls outside the human range.
Okay, is that true, Dr.
No,
Bergman?
that's not true. She's wrong about that. They're
The,
different
D-
group.
the DNA of Neanderthals were similar to modern humans, and some humans, in fact, if I remember correctly, if you're from Europe, and I think you talked to me about this in our last interview as well, you actually have Neanderthal DNA in your genome.
Right. I do.
Right. But yet they're supposed to be a different species. They said that the morphology is different. She might be talking about the variations like within the brow and I know we didn't talk about this in our last interview, but I remember you talking about it on Standing for Truth. Their bodies were thicker than ours usually. Is that correct?
Right. Bodies were more like a football player.
Yeah. But but the morphology isn't different to the point where you look at it and say it wasn't human, or another species of human.
I think she's saying it's an inferior race.
Yeah.
I think that's what she's implying.
Yeah.
Inferior to us.
Okay, Neanderthals have
The sloping forehead, large brow ridge. But
Neanderthals have uniquely derived characteristics. They have the occipital bun, the retromolar gap. They have the platycephalic skull, right? These guys are not. They have different wear patterns on their incisors. That's not. I mean, it's morphological, but it's also behavioral. They are not. They're not going to be like clockable as Homo sapiens and fossil record. Like they are distinct. They evolved their own distinct characteristics. And Homo erectus isn't going to be confused for Homo sapiens or Neanderthals because of its characteristics that are diagnosed.
just really in art.
All right. This will be the last thing we'll respond to on this.
They
Like you
have
said-
distinct traits, but then so do other people groups today. Chinese have distinct traits.
Right.
Blacks have distinct traits. So she's saying, yeah, they have some distinct traits. Yeah, they do. That's
Right.
what's the problem?
I've never seen you present those pictures as well from that doctor in Africa. The one that takes pictures of his patients and show different features that moderners even have that are
Right.
similar to Neanderthals. And then she says, no, they have some additional ones that Tompkins doesn't mention. And so she's basically claiming that these features are not as common, or at least not. I don't know if she's claiming it's common or not at all in humans, or at least not completely.
And she could say the same thing about blacks. They have all these traits which are unique.
Yeah.
Okay. There's probably 20 traits that are unique among the blacks. They're a different race. Well, those traits are not of concern to us. And of course, you're looking at traits which you stereotype, and there's so many blacks don't have those traits as Neanderthals. If we had a good sample of thousands of Neanderthals, I'm sure we'd find some that don't have all those traits, at least as clearly as others. So
essentially, she's arguing that they must be inferior to the modern humans, and modern humans are like very unlike them to the point where these got to be a different species is what she's arguing for. And so she thinks that these variations make them a different species, and we would argue no, that doesn't make them different species. You can even find these kinds of features in modern humans, even if they're not commonplace, they're still there, they're still present in our DNA.
exactly, there's only one race, the human race. End of story.
Right. Awesome. And we're going to end on that note. Thank everybody for joining me on Apologetics 101 on this episode of the Tompkins Controversy. Glad you with me. Sorry for it being such a long one. I know some of my supporters complain about some of my videos being long. The Tompkins Controversy, most of those videos are going to be long. It's just because of out of necessity. Trying to make sure that I don't leave no stone unturned whenever I deal with these very touchy matters and all the issues, to try to bring you accurate information, up-to-date information, and be able to bring you responses that you can take to the battlefield of ideas, because I know that you're going to be crossing paths with critics. They're going to be bringing this stuff up and that sort of thing. And of course, another reason this is long, though, is because this guy contains 2 different interviews. I could have done this as 2 separate videos, I suppose, and maybe somebody in the comments will bring that up. Yeah, I could have done that. But I really just kind of wanted to cut 2 birds with 1 stone and just kind of do it as a single video, since they're at least, the subject matter is at least closely related. It mainly dealt with that section of the Tompkins controversy where she responds to Tompkins on this subject matter and made certain claims during that time. In her original response to my original interview with Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins. And so there was a section of that she responded to, and so I know this doesn't have anything to do with the controversy as a whole, but it did have something to do with her response to my interview, and I wanted to be able to respond to it because that's one of the 3 goals of this response series, is to respond to what she said in that discussion. I will be responding to a few other things in that as well, that specifically isolated to that particular her particular response to my Tompkins interview. All right. Again, I know it's been a long one. Thank you for joining. If you want to, you could just watch one of the interviews and then watch the second interview, however you want to do it, or both, to gain some clear perspectives. There's a little bit more details in my Dr. Jerry Bergman as far as responding to space specifics. And so you got Australopithecines, you got Lucy being brought up, you got Neanderthals, and you got some clear responses on that. Although it didn't show it in the clip that I had designed for Dr. Bergman, but Dr. Bergman did say later that what she said on Neanderthals was just silly. I think he was referring to the fact that they have different physical features on them, made them different species, and then he was like, that's just ridiculous. That's not the case. And so anyway, I just thought it would be interesting. Go ahead and do that. Get that over with. I already have the interviews pre-recorded, so I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Do not forget to subscribe to my channel, like the videos, and I will see you on the next one.